Hello there and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. The Lebanese Red Cross says 18 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in northern Lebanon as Israel continues its bombardment of Gaza. The EU condemns Israel's attacks on peacekeepers in Lebanon as Netanyahu accuses UNIFIL of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah after a fifth UN staff member is injured. And with just 3 weeks to go until Election Day, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris hold dueling events in the pivotal battleground state of Pennsylvania. We get the latest from Washington. Welcome. Well, the Lebanese Red Cross says 18 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on Aitu in northern Lebanon. This marks the first time Israel has targeted the Christian-majority northern region in the past year of hostilities. Israel has not yet commented on that strike. The Lebanese Health Ministry stating that 51 people were killed by Israeli strikes across the country on Sunday. In Gaza, Hamas-run authorities say an Israeli attack on a school used as a shelter resulted in 22 deaths, including 15 children. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees saying the building was intended for administering polio vaccines. Israel claims it was housing Hamas militants. At least 4 Palestinians have been killed and dozens others injured after Israeli fighter jets bombed a tent camp on the grounds of Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital officials say 25 people were transferred to the Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza after suffering severe burns. Elsewhere, a Hezbollah drone attack on Sunday night killed 4 Israeli soldiers at an army base south of Haifa, making it one of the deadliest attacks by Hezbollah in over a year of conflict. Well, there's a lot to talk about there. For reaction to all of that, I'm joined by Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani, the Israeli military's spokesperson. Look, let's just start with your personnel. Those 4 soldiers killed in the Hezbollah claimed drone strike last night. Today, Israel's military repelling attacks by the Islamic resistance in Iraq, Syria also sending drones as well. Are you seeing that there's coordinated attacks towards your military facilities at the moment?
Well, we've seen this throughout over a year now, that Iran and its proxies have been attacking us from 7 fronts in the same time. This is a multi-front war that we've been facing that is driven by Iran. And just like last night, the attack on our military base was used by, and you guessed it, an Iranian UAV. This is part of those attacks that have been going on for over a year now. If we're talking about the northern front, Hezbollah alone have fired over 13,000 missiles, rockets, and UAVs towards Israel. So this is not a new thing, not a new type of aggression. This is something they've been trying for a year. We've had good success rates intercepting them, but again, this threat is so large. Sadly, sometimes these types of incidents happen, and we will investigate them and learn from them and understand how to prevent them in the future. But this is part of the Iranian aggression. Hezbollah has been operating as an Iranian proxy and basically choosing Iran over the people of Lebanon, prioritizing them and choosing Iran over the people of Lebanon and dragging Lebanon, and the whole region into this war.
No, indeed, there was some are saying it was a huge security failing last night, because this is the most, if we can say those terms, successful strike from the point of view of Iran and Hezbollah in terms of killing 4 Israeli soldiers in a base. The strike apparently around a cafeteria, based on certain reports. You can probably tell us more. But why was the strike not intercepted, as many strikes are previously in Israel?
Well, there was a problem in the identification of that UAV, and again, saying there's been hundreds and many hundreds of UAVs flown towards Israel in this war. We've had very good interception rates. Talking in a world standard, over 80% of those attacks have been intercepted. But the amount and the difficulty is something we are facing and learning. And in this case, we were able to thwart one UAV that was coming in, and the second one was able to get away. And that's part of what we're studying at the moment. But we have made it clear. We will go after the UAV units in Hezbollah. We will find them. We will dismantle them. We will destroy those UAVs and those operators. A lot of them Iranian UAVs. A lot of them have been trained by Iran, and we will go after them to remove this threat of Israeli civilians and Israeli soldiers.
Today, your Defence Minister Yoav Gallant vowing a forceful response for that drone attack. What will that look like?
Well, we've been defending ourselves against Hezbollah, but also in recent weeks have been operating also to actively remove those threats. Hezbollah has seen our abilities. Hezbollah has seen what happens when we decide to put a lot of effort and focus using our intelligence, our Air Force, as we have done with their rocket launcher abilities, with their senior commanders' abilities, and we'll do the same with their UAV abilities now. We will be going after them, removing the threat of them, and removing those terrorists who operate them.
Now let's talk about your military offensives on, you called it the Northern Front there. That's obviously, and then you've got what's going on in Gaza as well. And there is international horror today. The pictures from Israel's attack on Gaza's Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, pictures of people burning alive, videos that have made it round the world. What do you say to that? How can you justify those types of actions?
Well, first of all, any life to any loss of innocent life is a tragedy on both sides. This is not a war we chose. This is a war that Hamas started with a brutal massacre on October 7th. And ever since, we've been trying to fight Hamas while Hamas is hiding behind their civilians. And we've seen it happen again. You know, this is part of their strategy, part of their tactics to hide behind civilians. We've seen them move from mosques to UN facilities, to schools, to hospitals, hiding there, operating from there, carrying out terror attacks. And what happened in this case, we carried out a precise attack against those terrorists who were operating in that area, planning to carry out terror attacks against soldiers and Israeli civilians. And you can see in the videos that are hard to watch, I agree, you can see those secondary explosions. And what we understand in our initial inquiry to the event is that a secondary explosions caused the fire that caused this sad result. And it comes to show exactly what we're talking about. Why are those rockets there? Why are those explosives there? Why is there secondary explosions in an area of a hospital? I think that is a question that needs to be asked for Hamas, and we can say very clearly, every loss of innocent life on both sides is a tragedy. We do everything we can. In a lot of cases, we give a notice for people to get out of harm's way. That is something that most armies don't do. The most important element in war is the element of surprise, and every time we have the chance or the possibility to do so, we do it. Our goal has been very clear: to prevent harm to civilians, to go after this terror organization that promised if they get another chance, they'll commit another October 7th. And that is what we're doing. And we're also looking into this incident because, as I said again, every loss of innocent life is a tragedy.
Just talking about that, those requests or the orders for people to evacuate in northern Gaza, you've asked 400,000 people, it's expected, are around there, to move to the south because there's going to be a period of sustained military activity there. Apart from the criticisms of where they'll go and how you can move that size of people around, there's analysis asking whether you're going to try and adopt what's been called the General's Plan, which is this idea of kind of laying siege to northern Gaza, blocking food and water after you've evacuated people, and anybody left will be considered a terror target. Is that the case?
No, I will say it very clearly. It is not the case. Just today, we've seen trucks of aids go into northern Gaza. And in the last year plus, we have been doing everything in our ability to make sure aid is coming into Gaza. Hamas has been doing everything in their ability to make sure that aid does not get directly to the people of Gaza. Over 1 million tons of aid have gone into Gaza. And what's happening right now in northern Gaza, in addition to the trucks going in with aid today, we are fighting against Hamas, who is trying to regroup in the area of Jabalia. And this is a hardcore of Hamas terrorists fighting us in a very densely populated area. And we want to make sure those civilians get a chance to get out of harm's way. That is what we're doing. And at the same time, we're fighting this terror group that has a plan to murder us, but not just soldiers, to murder Israeli civilians. And we're fighting them in Jabalia. And I can tell you it's heavy battles that are being conducted in that area. We've had numerous accounts of heavy fire towards our forces. We've had injured soldiers. We've even had casualties in recent days because of Hamas fire from that area in Jabalia.
Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani of the Israel military speaking to us tonight. Well, to get the other side of things, I'm now joined by Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative and member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. And I'm not sure if you managed to hear the conversation I just had there with Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani, but I will start by asking you the same question about the pictures from Gaza overnight, the Israeli attack, causing horror around the world, seeing people in sort of flames, or videos have been shared widely. Do you think any of that is going to add any pressure on the way Israel is conducting its military operations, sir?
No, because the West is supporting Israel. Because most of the Western governments are continuing their unlimited support to Israel, although it has committed terrible crimes. Because the United States of America keeps telling the world that they are defending Israel, and they keep sending Israel all kinds of military equipment, including 50,000 tons of explosives that are used in Gaza. But on the other hand, I'm really surprised. I didn't hear everything that was said, but I think what we are dealing with is a fascist government, a fascist Israeli system, a fascist Israeli parties, a fascist Israeli people who are committing terrible genocide in Gaza. What can justify killing 17,000 Palestinian children? What can justify the bombardment that you have just described, burning people alive? And all these lies that they keep telling about fighters hiding among the civilian population. The big question here is why Israel is occupying Palestinians for 76 years. Why Israel displaced 70% of the Palestinian people in 1948, committing terrible massacres to force them out. And why the Israeli army is now starving the people of the northern parts of Gaza, trying to push them again out of their country. 70% of the population of Gaza are refugees from the land that they've been evicted from in 1948. And now they want to conduct another genocide, another collective punishment, and another act of ethnic cleansing. That is the reality of what the Israeli army is doing. They claim to be moral, but where is morality in killing 52,000 Palestinians, 70% of whom are women and children and elderly people? All what we have heard are lies after lies after lies from a terrorist army, from a terrorist state. Yes, there is terrorism here, and the terrorist is Israel. The state of Israel, if you can call it a state, is nothing but a fascist entity that continues to commit genocide, collective punishment, and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population. Why are they invading Lebanon? Who is the aggressor here? And Lebanon said, Hezbollah said, they will stop the fighting immediately if Israel stops the attacks on Gaza. That's what Iran said. That's what Iraq said. Who killed Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, in Tehran? Wasn't it the Israeli side? Who attacked and bombarded places everywhere now in Lebanon, including Christian communities, as you have described? This is a country of aggression that never stopped its aggression on Palestinian people, on Arab people, occupying other people's lands, and not only occupying our land, but annexing them to Israel as well.
Sir, you've made it your life's work to obviously campaign on the part of Palestinian people, politically, socially, everything. At some points, I believe you were supportive of a two-state solution, but you describe now the people of Israel as fascist, not just the government, not just the military. You say the fascist Israeli people. How far are we now from having any sort of diplomatic channel through this off-ramp out of this military action?
I didn't say that all Israelis are fascists, but I say I mean that most of the Israeli society has moved towards fascism, yes. And without that, you would not have seen this fascist government. But there are people in Israel who want to see real peace. There are Jewish people in the United States of America who support Palestinian people and organize demonstrations in support of Palestine. And these noble people give us hope that there is a different kind of people with whom we can deal, but not this Israeli government. Unfortunately, not the majority of the Israeli society, who are advocating now not only aggression on Palestinians, but also on Iran, on Lebanon, on Iraq, on Jordan, and on other countries. And is there a place for diplomatic solution? There was, but Israel killed it. The Palestinian Authority concluded or signed Oslo Agreement, which I found unjust, but nevertheless, they were the official representative of the Palestinian people, the PLO, and they signed an agreement which gives Palestinians eventually only a little state on 22% of the land of historic Palestine, instead of 44%, which was assigned by the United Nations decision that allowed Israel to exist. And Palestinians recognized Israel. Israel never recognized Palestine. Who killed Oslo Agreement? Netanyahu. Who killed the possibility of peace? The Israeli governments. Who stopped negotiations? It was Israel. Who is conducting settlement expansion every day in the occupied Palestinian territories in violation of international law? It is Israel. Who is organizing these settlers to be gangs, terrorizing Palestinian communities and evicting them from their homes in the West Bank? It is the Israeli government and the Israeli army. So in my opinion, when you have a situation where 7.3 million Palestinians live on the land of historic Palestine versus 7.1 Jewish people, what's the solution? It's either two states, which they refuse, or one democratic state, which they also refuse. What is their solution? Ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. Isn't that fascism?
Sir, before we run out of time in the show, I just want to talk to you about what is also happening in northern Gaza, with orders from the Israeli military for around, it's believed, 400,000 people to move to the south of Gaza. Hamas, meanwhile, sending messages telling those people not to move. And there appears to be a sustained period of military conflict from Israel coming. Talk to me about your concerns.
Well, I also say that people should not. Why should people leave their homes? Where should they go to? You know that Israel evicted already about 1.7 million people out of their homes, and then they put them in the south in a strip that is no more than 22 square kilometers, deprived of food, deprived of water, deprived of shelters, deprived of medications, living in horrible conditions, no bathrooms, no shelters, no latrines, nothing. The people are in horrible situation. The people in the north of Gaza don't want to leave because they've seen what happened to their relatives who left. And still, they were bombarded also in the south. So you can be killed in the north or in the south. Now, I am a medical doctor, as you know, and we have medical teams now working in Gaza. They report to us horrible things. People are shattered and killed in the streets. Their bodies are lying on the ground. Nobody can even bury them. If people are injured, nobody can get to them to treat them. Houses are demolished and burned down. Tanks are moving around, shooting and bombarding people. No supplies of food has been allowed into northern Gaza for 12 days now. No medications is allowed there. Our medical teams cannot move around to treat the injured people. And now the 3 left hospitals there were attacked several times, and the Israeli army is trying to force the doctors and nurses to get out of the hospitals and leave their patients. That is the reality of what's happening in the northern part of Gaza.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as the world awaits Israel's response to Iran's attack, Iraq has warned Iran and Israel not to use its airspace for retaliation against each other, as Iran's Prime Minister tries to keep the country out of a potential wider regional war. But interests within the country may make that difficult, as Stuart Smith reports from Baghdad.
With the region on edge ahead of Israel's promised retaliation, Baghdad is trying to balance competing interests. The government says its priority is keeping Iraqis safe, and while it's incredibly critical of Israel's actions in Gaza and Lebanon, it does not want to get involved militarily. Not all agree, though, with keeping out of the fight. A group calling itself the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which has ties to Iran, continues to use drones daily to attack Israeli positions, earlier in the month killing 2 Israeli soldiers. Many worry that its actions against the government's wishes could make Iraq vulnerable to retaliation from Israel. Baghdad would rather position itself as a potential mediator in the conflict, a third party that can make use of good communication channels between Iran and the United States. Should a wider regional war break out, Prime Minister al-Sudani warns a terrorist resurgence in the region could follow from the chaos. Stuart Smith, Al Arabiya News, Baghdad.
Well, let's get some of the day's other news now. Pakistan's capital is under 8 strict lockdown ahead of a gathering of world powers, with Chinese Premier Li Qiang arriving for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. A 3-day holiday is in effect in Islamabad as extensive police and military presence secures the city. The threat level remains high following deadly attacks over the past week. China's military began a new round of war games near Taiwan today, labelling them a warning to the, quote, separatist acts of Taiwan independence forces. Taiwan, which is governed democratically and considered by China to be its own territory, had been on alert for further military exercises following President Liu Xingtie's National Day speech last week. China's war games have drawn condemnation from both Taipei and the US. South Korea saying it is ready to respond to North Korea after the latter ordered troops on the border. The escalating dialogue comes as the North blames its southern neighbour of flying leaflets across the border, a charge the South denies. Seoul says North Korea may blow up roads connecting the South and, quote, completely separate its territory. Let's go to Lebanon now, where the European Union elsewhere condemned Israel's attacks on UN peacekeepers operating in Lebanon after a 5th peacekeeper was injured in the south of the country. Now, this does follow claims made by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is hindering the Israeli army by keeping peacekeepers in the danger zone. In a video on Sunday, he also accused UNIFIL of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah.
I would like to appeal directly to the UN Secretary-General. It is time for you to remove UNIFIL from Hezbollah strongholds and from the fighting areas. The IDF has repeatedly asked for this and has been met with repeated refusals, all aimed at providing a human shield to Hezbollah terrorists. Your refusal to evacuate the UNIFIL soldiers makes them hostages of Hezbollah. This endangers both them and the lives of our soldiers. We regret the injury to the UNIFIL soldiers, and we are doing everything in our power to prevent this injury. But the simple and obvious way to ensure this is simply to get them out of the danger zone.
Mr. Secretary General, get the UNIFIL forces out of harm's way. It should be done right now, immediately.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined from Beirut by Dr. Sami Nader, the director of the Institute of Political Science, St. Joseph University. Thanks for joining us again. Let's just talk about...
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's talk about UNIFIL then. Is Israel trying to push UNIFIL out of southern Lebanon?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from Israeli perspective, the UNIFIL mission could not, throughout the year, stop Hezbollah from conducting its operation into northern Israel, nor to have the 1701 implemented. In fact, since day one, since the adoption of the resolution, the mandate of this force was not that clear. Whether this resolution was under the Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, in fact, its wording was more like to be under Chapter 6 because it was more than an observer's mission and asked the UNIFIL to implement security on the ground, ensure security on the ground. And this resolution was building on the resolution 1559 that calls for disarming of all militia. However, even though the wording was strong, the resolution was adopted under Chapter 6, meaning there is no obligation to use force in order to implement it. And today, it's obvious that Israel wants this UNIFIL to be out of the picture, to have a free hand, to have not to encounter any hindrance in conducting its military operation, especially that the declared military operation is to ensure a belt of security all along the border between Israel and Lebanon, a 5-kilometer depth of all along the border. So the presence of the UNIFIL there could present a hindrance to implementing the plan. And this is as well a message to the United Nations for any possible resolution to be adopted in order to have it to have a mission more strongly defined in that sense that if there is any help to be provided to the Lebanese army, it should be under the chapter. A new resolution should be under Chapter 7.
And just while we have you, given your expertise and given you are in Lebanon, I want to ask you about today's Israeli attack on the Christian-dominated north, as it's been described, of Lebanon. For our international viewers, can you talk about why that is significant?
I mean, it's clear that Israel is going after every single Hezbollah operatives. And it's clear that after the recent Israeli operation targeting all Hezbollah leaders, whether political leaders or operation leaders on the ground, like all the middle rank leaders. And now they are widespread all over Lebanon because they are leaving areas like the southern suburb of Beirut or the south, try to seek a more secured region. And I mean, maybe betting that Israel will not go after them in this remote region. But in fact, what we have seen in the ground, Israeli military operation being conducted in the Druze area, like in the Shuf, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and now in the Christian side. And this is as well to put the pressure on those sectarian group to not to welcome any Hezbollah or suspected Hezbollah people in their land and between their civilians. And the price is like what we've seen today, is the civilians who are paying the heavy price of the possible Hezbollah presence among them.
Just finally, what are your fears for Lebanon in the coming days?
I mean, because this is a very fractured society, because now it had to suffer a huge wave of refugees coming from the south, from the Bekaa, and given the deep political divide around Hezbollah arms and Hezbollah monopolizing the decision of peace and war and paralyzing the state institution, and in fact their takeover of the state, I fear the possible backlash and sectarian rife, something similar to what happened during the Civil War. But in fact, but given that the level of awareness of the civilian people, up to now, the threat has been contained. But the question is, what if this war drag, and there are many reasons to think that this the tension among the sectarian group, among the pro-Hezbollah constituency and the anti-Hezbollah one, will come to a clash.
Dr. Sami Naidef, the Director of the Institute of Political Science at St. Joseph University, thank you for your time. Well, to some business news now. Italy's biggest bank apologising for a security break, supposedly involving Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. An Intesa Sanpaolo employee has been fired after reportedly spying on the bank accounts of thousands of customers, including the Premier and other high-profile customers. British luxury brand Mulberry considering a $145 million takeover deal. That's after its second-largest shareholder, Frasers Group, significantly raised an $83 million bid previously rejected by the loss-making company. 3 professors have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for their work on economies post-colonisation. Their research focusing on the importance of institutions. In a statement, the prize saying their work gave insight into vast differences in prosperity between nations. Well, heading stateside now, where it's just over 3 weeks until Americans go to the ballot box to decide their next leader. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump holding competing events today in the crucial battleground state of Pennsylvania as they make their final pitches to voters just weeks before Election Day. Harris will speak in Erie, while Trump will host a town hall on the economy in the suburbs of Philadelphia. For more, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by our correspondent Benji Hire. Benji, good to see you. Give us the latest from the trail. Both candidates in Pennsylvania today.
They are former US President and current Vice President, hot on each other's heels again, hosting dueling events in Pennsylvania where the election may be won or lost. It is called the Keystone State. Fittingly, it could decide who holds the keys to the building behind me, because Pennsylvania and its huge natural gas industry really has the power to sway this contest. 19 electoral votes are up for grabs. That's the most out of any swing state. It fell to Donald Trump in 2016, Joe Biden in 2020, both times you might recall by the narrowest of margins. And remarkably, in the past 50 years, Pennsylvania has only picked the losing candidate twice. So it is no surprise that both nominees this time time round back in the fossil fuel hub where they are tied neck and neck. This is Harris's 10th time there in past months. Just last week, Trump made several stops in the state. It's also where he was almost assassinated in July. And a big focus, as I just mentioned, will be energy, because if you drill into the matters that are at the heart of why voters are voting in certain ways in the sprawling hills of Pennsylvania, you find that it is energy. It is fracking, which is the hot button issue. That process of blasting resources from the ground has helped make the United States the largest oil and gas producer in the world, but it has also become a polarizing political point. Donald Trump slamming Kamala Harris's comments that she made during her first bid for the presidency years ago. She said at the time she'd ban fracking. She's since U-turned, not promising not to ban that practice, which helps fuel the economy in Pennsylvania. But still, Harris's initial remarks have sort of stuck in many people's minds, and her change of stance, her flip-flopping on fracking, if you like, that sits in very stark contrast to Trump's full-throated endorsement. Their appearances there today will focus on that. They will also be following a flurry of sort of vociferous weekend campaign trail activity. Donald Trump again railing against immigration, threatening even to target his political enemies if he wins next month. Harris, on the other hand, questioning her rival's health as he vies for the Oval Office for the third time.
And Benji, you've already given me a taste there in terms of the battleground states, but what are the polls saying nationwide? Who's ahead at the moment?
Well, nationally, pretty tight. It's a dead heat. But of course, what people shouldn't forget is what decides this election is just those handful of states like Pennsylvania. And even in them, it is often too close to call. So I think that it's a very finely balanced election. Even small changes among certain groups could be all the difference between winning or losing. What I have found interesting, and I've just come from Georgia a few days ago, a state that could go either way. And it's in places like Georgia that we're seeing the Harris camp try to make some gains in deeply red Republican counties. Now, even if she loses in those counties, and she likely will, what she's trying to do is narrow the margins overall in those areas, move the needle just that little bit. And the hope for her is that those gains could make a bigger difference, especially given that polls are showing that a portion of young, inner city, black males especially, the traditionally blue base for the Democratic Party, they're shifting away from the Democrats in part towards Donald Trump.
Our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Benji Hire, thank you. A reminder of our top stories now. The Lebanese Red Cross saying 18 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in northern Lebanon as Israel continues its bombardment of Gaza as well. The EU condemns Israel's attacks on peacekeepers in Lebanon as Netanyahu accuses UNIFIL of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah after a fifth UN staff member is injured. And with just 3 weeks to go until Election Day, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris hold events in the pivotal battleground state of Pennsylvania. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Riz Khan, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burges Watson for Global News Today. At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
On this episode of the Riz Khan Show, we mark an unhappy anniversary. 1 year after October the 7th, tens of thousands of Palestinians are dead, hundreds of thousands displaced, while Israelis mourn their own dead and plead for the return of the hostages. We'll look back on the Israel-Gaza war through the eyes of people whose lives have been forever changed.
There are plenty of people walking around Washington, D.C. who owe their lives to my next guest. Tariq Haddad is a Palestinian American who has saved countless patients through his work as a cardiologist. But he's been helpless to save more than 175 members of his own family who have lost their lives during the Israeli military operation in Gaza. He turned down an offer to meet the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken as he considered the 3-minute appointment inadequate to address his outrage. Dr. Haddad and I sat down for a conversation at his home in Virginia. Dr. Haddad, thanks for making the time. I know this is not an easy conversation, but I'm glad you could at least give us the time for it. Let's start by painting a picture of your early life, your experiences of Gaza as a child.
So I thank you for having me. I grew up in Gaza, so from the time I was a few months old, most of my formative youth, my memories are just the beauty of Gaza, the people, I grew up in my grandmother's home. So my parents moved there when I was 3 months old in Khan Yunis. We lived there among, my very large extended family. The entire street actually is all our family and our extended family. My memories growing up, were several things. So, of course, a lot of happiness in terms of, my family, beautiful, beautiful people. Palestinians just are warm, incredibly giving people. But, there's a lot of memories of just living under occupation. And that even as a child, not understanding the history or anything, it was very formative in my life. Just growing up with very little water, very little electricity. If I took a long shower, there wasn't enough water for everybody else to cook with. So, memories like that. Lots of violence, growing up under violence. It's just a fact of life as a Palestinian.
Which also is one of the reasons there are such big extended families. Everyone's quite closely bonded under those circumstances, aren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's, there's no family member who has not been affected in some way, shape, or form by violence. Every one of my cousins has either been, jailed, been hit, been affected in some way by the Israeli occupation. I myself was shot at multiple times by rubber bullets playing chess in the street with my cousins. This was when I was around 13 years old. It's just a fact of life, and like you said, family and the bond of family among Palestinians is what kind of keeps you together under these very, very trying circumstances.
How did your journey take you from Gaza to Virginia here in the USA, where you're just like 20 minutes from the White House and the State Department?
Palestinians, one of the things people don't know a lot about Palestinians is because so much of our life is controlled by others. The occupation, having, food and water and electricity and everything around you, your laws, everything is controlled. And so one of the only things that we have control over to the best of our ability is education. And it's a huge value among Palestinians on education. And so, my parents always, really made that incumbent upon us. And I thankfully, thanks to my parents, had a wonderful education. I was able to eventually come to the United States for my high school years, and then went to Duke University for college. Went on to medical school and my medical training thereafter in the United States.
How easy was it to stay in touch with your extended family once you were based here in the U.S.?
It was extremely difficult. So I tried, before I started my medical training, I would go back as much as I could every summer whenever I was able to. The problem is that because of the, once it got to around 2005, 2006, and the Israeli blockade on Gaza started, the border with Gaza was only open on average 4 days a month. And so when when somebody's in their medical training and, it was very difficult to be able to go back there and knowing I could get essentially, trapped in there for months on end. So it was very difficult. But we still, my family is always in my minds, and we talk all the time, all my family over there. So,
as you and I sit here, today is actually the anniversary of the Hamas attacks of October the 7th, 2023. What do you recall of hearing about that when it happened, and what went through your head as an American, as a Palestinian, as a doctor?
I think it was a difficult day. I believe, and every Palestinian I know believes, that every human life is valuable, and it doesn't matter. I don't put any credence to any difference among people, among religion. It's all equal, and any loss of human life, innocent life, is a tragedy to me. Both the loss of innocent lives on October 7th, and of course, the 45,000 Palestinians who've been killed since. And all the thousands and thousands of Palestinians that have been killed before that. It's all, to me, unnecessary and tragic, in my opinion.
Certainly in the Western narrative, discussing that attack in a very diverse way has become difficult. And it's described as the next Holocaust and so on. But you as a Palestinian, when you heard about the extent of this attack by Hamas and the other groups that joined them, what went through your head? Was it kind of inevitable?
I don't ascribe to any loss of innocent civilians as being inevitable. Having said that, seeing the incredible suffering the Palestinian people have gone through from the time I was born in the early 70s until now, and even before that, for 75 years, and then seeing the incredible suffering my family has been under, even during the blockade. Since the mid-2000s, they've lived on average with 4 hours of electricity a day. They've lived with, water that's literally under the WHO, World Health Organization, minimum standards for what people should have. They've lived under, inability to go in and out, to go places, incredible conditions that restricted any freedom of movement, any freedom, any ability to live. And I think, people living under those circumstances, under desperation, with, rates of poverty exceeding any in the world, for the most part, there's going to be desperation. There's going to be desperation, and I think, sadly, I think violence gets bred out of that sort of situation. Because Palestinians have been living under this violence for 75 years, and it's very sad. The whole thing is sad, but I think you have to understand it within the context of all the incredible violence that Palestinians have lived under for so many years.
When it happened, what thoughts did you have about the possible repercussions it would have on your family, the risks it presented?
Oh, I knew immediately. I've dealt with collective punishment in my family for years. The year my youngest son was born, 10 of my family members were killed, including small children, in 2014. And this was Israeli attacks on Gaza, and these were little children who were running in the street. So I've lived with this for years, and I knew this would lead to a lot of death of civilians, and I knew right away. I don't think I had any idea the tragic lengths to which it went, and the way that it affected my family and the family of every person in Gaza.
When you heard about the attack a year ago, then when did you then start to hear about what was happening to your family members? When the losses started from that?
Oh, it's within a few days. The attack started almost immediately, and I would say by mid-October, we were starting to see casualties in my family, and deaths, and homes being destroyed, and then they just really started to mount. And most of my family on my mom's side is in Khan Yunis. Most of my family on my father's side is in Gaza. So they were getting it on both sides. And it's, at this point, we've almost lost track of how many deaths in my family, but it's been well over, at this point, 175 people in my family who've been killed. And it's just been a steady stream. It started in mid-October, and it hasn't stopped since.
Dr. Haddad, one of the problems with discussing the numbers of people killed, the statistic, is that it starts to cloud what are the actual individual stories, the people, the human beings behind those numbers. And that's obviously now evident more so than ever with you and your story. So let's talk about the members of the families that you've lost. And I know it's a difficult conversation, but tell me about some of them. So, who they were and what happened.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, the past year has been a collective nightmare for my family. There's too many to list, and that's the sad part. But just some of the stories that come to mind, just dozens and dozens of children. There's an infant, Sabir, who died in December in the middle of the tents in Rafah after his house had been destroyed, and he died after his father had been killed, all of his siblings had been killed, and his mother had been killed. He was orphaned, and he died from hypothermia in the middle of December. A child who was literally a few days old, and he died from hypothermia, completely unnecessary, having had his home destroyed and all of his family destroyed. Another child from my mom's side of the family, Hamza, who, he and his parents and his uncle and aunt and his other uncle and his grandparents all lived in one home. One Israeli missile attack in Khan Yunis on October 25th killed 16 members of his family. Hamza was barely 10 years old, okay, and he survived. He's the only one of his family. He survived. He woke up in a hospital with an amputation and with the news that his parents, his uncle, his aunt, his other uncle, his grandparents, every single member of his family had been killed. And then he himself succumbed to the trauma from his amputation. I just wish your listeners could understand what it would be like. Just take Palestinian or Israeli out of this and just imagine if you were a 10-year-old kid, every single member of your family has been killed, and you wake up in a hospital with an amputation for no reason. You're a child. Another family member of mine from my mother's side of the family, Tuqa, who was killed on her wedding day. Imagine being killed on your wedding day. She was killed with 9 other members of her family on the day of her wedding. Another cousin of mine, Dan Al-Farra, who was killed while she was pregnant. Another was killed on the day she got her PhD while she was sheltering in Rafah. My first cousin from my father's side, Hani, was killed with his mother. He survived initially to find his mother buried from the waist up in the rubble of their home, dead, along with his brother. He managed to survive with a fairly minor leg injury and bled to death the next day because there was no hospitals near his home. In Gaza, every hospital had been destroyed. He died from a completely preventable wound. The stories go on, and they just continue month after month. Just recently in August, one of my cousins, Abdullah, was going to get bread for his family. His family was hungry. He just went in Khan Yunis just to wherever he could get bread. He had one bag of bread in each of his hands, and he was walking back to his home, and an Israeli missile hit him and killed him. And our last picture of him was him dead on the side of the road with a bag of bread in each hand. Just recently, about 4 or 5 days ago, another large segment of my mother's side of the family, 23 family members, all killed in a strike that was massive, absolutely destroyed. I think I provided you some video, but it's destroyed literally what looks like the equivalent of a New York City block. And it was 9 stories and numerous families all killed, 23 members of my family. So yeah, numbers don't really tell the story. It's all these human stories. These are all innocent people. These are all members of my family that either I know or my uncles or my aunts know. They're beautiful people, pharmacists, physicians, children, PhD candidates, brides on their wedding day, interior decorators, a journalist, stories. These are people like any of us. And sadly, I feel like one of the things as a Palestinian we've learned this year is how much we are dehumanized. We're not really looked at as people. just numbers. And I think their stories need to be heard.
That missile attack to which you just referred actually happened very recently.
Yes.
And it means that you're having to keep a toll, and that toll just continues.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
It's incredibly difficult. You know, we keep a record of it to honor them, because they are beautiful people, and I don't want them to have died in vain. And it's you know, and I believe we owe it to them. But yes, it has a toll. And you know, my uncle, you know, we do a lot of different projects to help over there. And you know, one of my uncles does a beautiful thing. He literally keeps track of every single family member who needs something, and it's a list that's, you know, it goes on, and he literally physically writes down every single family he's given supplies to, food to, something to, because you know, we need to honor people. We need to you know, do what we can under incredibly difficult circumstances.
You work as a cardiologist. You save the lives of people, irrespective of race, religion, color, or anything. And you've still been powerless to be able to help your family in any way over there in Gaza. How has what you've witnessed and how you are still witnessing, or what you're still witnessing, how has that affected your own personal relationship with, you know, what is the value of life, your relationship with life and death?
It's difficult. I mean, like you said, as a physician, I treat everybody equally. I always have, always will. You know, the lack of respect for basic human life that's happened over the past year, it really makes it difficult as a physician. And it's really hard when, you know, so much, you know, as a cardiologist who works on prevention, I talk so much about what you can do to prevent something as opposed to just treating it on the back end. And so much of what's happening is preventable. And it's extremely difficult. When I have to hear statistics like 4 hours of water a day, or 4 hours of electricity a day, excuse me, when I have to hear things like water that's below the WHO minimum, when I have to hear that, you know, most medications, there's not enough supply for you know, essential medications in Gaza. That's the vast majority. When I have to hear things like, you know, the vast majority of children in Gaza suffer from PTSD, that the most common complaint that brings on PTSD in them is the sound of missile fire. I mean, can you imagine, you know, knowing as a physician all the stuff that's preventable? My own cousin, who's now in the United States, to this day, it is very hard for us to go to a fireworks show because he grew up in Gaza when he was a child. And every time he hears fireworks, it makes him wince because he grew up in the only thing he remembers about that sound is bombs.
As a Palestinian American living in the USA, how do you react and how do you feel when the US continues to reaffirm its support for Israel, its continued supplying of weapons to Israel that is actually responsible for the deaths that your family and thousands, tens of thousands of others are enduring?
It's extremely, extremely difficult. You know, I don't necessarily, you know, delve into the political world, but when we as a country, when our tax dollars, when money that, you know, citizens are working for, and that money is going directly, not to a country, it's not about whether it's going to a country or not, but it's going directly towards the killing of over 45,000 people, you know, directly. I mean, you know, imagine if you were in my shoes and every single time you heard about a family member being killed. And I quite literally have family on the ground telling me, yep, U.S. bombs. You know, we can see the jets, we can see the bombs, we can see exactly what's happening. And I know that that's quite literally, you know, money coming out of my pocket, you know, that's going towards these weapons. It's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult.
So what goes through your head when you hear Israel and the US backing its perspective that it's targeting Hamas fighters who are hiding using civilians as human shields?
Well, since I know most of the family of my family that have been killed, and I know the circumstances, and I quite literally have the video showing what's happening, and I know these beautiful people, I'm incredulous. That's the only way I can say it. you explained to me how children, getting bags of bread, in the street with nobody around them represents a human shield. You tell me how, a family of mine of 16 people, 3 generations, all living in one home, and beautiful people, including somebody on their wedding day. How in God's name is that representing a human shield? How is a child, who freezes to death as an infant, a human shield? It's very difficult for me to hear these things when the facts on the ground that I'm seeing as a human being, not in the press, but as somebody who has family there. It's very, very difficult to swallow and to grasp this.
You were among a group of Palestinian Americans invited by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to go to the State Department, just 8 miles from you here, to go and have a discussion with them, and you declined. Now, some would say that was the perfect opportunity to express your anger, to express your frustration. What made you decide not to go?
So I think the context of what happened, so this was in early February, so the context I think is important. So at that time, the United States at that time, under the leadership of both President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken, had already, sent billions of dollars in aid and released weapons from our strategic military reserve in the Middle East directly towards these attacks and towards the killing of my own family. And literally just a couple of days before this meeting was supposed to happen and this invitation happened, the United States had also decided to withdraw aid from the only major organization that's supplying any aid to the Palestinians in Gaza, which is the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. And so I get this invitation, we want a roundtable and with Palestinian leaders, and actions speak louder than words. And I found it very hard to believe that anything other than political grandstanding was to be accomplished by meeting with the Secretary of State, when every single action on the ground that he had shown was that he had absolutely no regard for Palestinian life, zero. And I just wasn't going to be, part of a group that was going to be used for political grandstanding. If you want to show that you value all human life, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity, I'll be happy to meet with you and talk to you about my views. But if you can't even bring yourself to recognize the importance of all human life, I'm not going to be used for political grandstanding.
So you wrote a 12-page letter that I understand was read out to Antony Blinken.
Yes.
And I know it was quite moving in many places. I'm wondering if you could just actually read out some of that statement to me so we get a sense of it, please.
Sure, yeah, no problem. This was read specifically to Antony Blinken at this round table, and I had a staffer actually print it out for him. So this was the portion that I had read to Secretary of State Blinken. Thank you for the invitation to the roundtable scheduled for today on the Gaza genocide. While I initially submitted an RSVP to attend later today, after a lot of soul searching, I've decided that I cannot in good conscience meet with you today, knowing this administration. How does one meet for what I was told would be 3 minutes with a person you hold responsible for not just the killing of your child, but rather the murder of over 80 of your family members? How do I say in 3 minutes to somebody who will forever in history be known for actively aiding and abetting one of the worst genocides in a century, what that person's actions have done, my family's suffering and that of my people? How do I look a person in the eyes for 3 minutes who not only could have prevented the death of my 85 family members and the nearly 15,000 children in Gaza who've been killed, but actively contributed to their suffering and death by providing military ammunitions from our U.S. military supply to kill my family and destroy their homes? How do I look you in the eyes knowing you couldn't even do the basic minimum, like calling for a ceasefire to end the suffering and the carnage, and even worse, are cutting off humanitarian assistance to 2 million people going through a famine of historic proportions? My family are subsisting on animal feed, Secretary Blinken, because of your policies.
And of course, the death toll has gone up since then.
Yes.
Did you get any feedback, any response from Secretary Blinken?
I was told by people, the staffer who was there, and some people that he stayed cold-faced the entire time as this letter was read to him. No response, and I did not get a personal response either.
As an American voter, do you have any interest in supporting any of the candidates or any of the governments with the way things are going for the U.S. election now?
I mean, right now, the person that I'm probably going to vote for is Jill Stein. I have no ability to vote, for a government right now that, as I said, actions speak louder than words. I cannot ethically as a person, not just as a Palestinian, but as a human being, I cannot support a government that has no problem donating and giving tens of billions of dollars towards the death of innocent children. I just can't do that. If you don't have the ethics to understand that that's wrong, it speaks to me about your ability to lead. And I cannot in good conscience, vote for the Democrats. They need to understand that this issue is a red line for a lot of people, and it's not just for Palestinians. It's anybody who cares about human life, who cares about decency and equality.
On that note, Washington, D.C. has seen a number of pro-Palestinian protests, and yet I also see, for example, Israeli flags in windows around your neighborhood. And I wonder, how do you feel when you see these? How do you now regard America, the country you call home?
I mean, I don't think it's shaken my faith in there are a lot of good people, and a lot of people who've understandably really put their careers on the line, their lives on the line for what's right. And I'm part of some very inspirational organizations that are multi-ethnic, multi-religious, incredibly meaningful ones that people who have nothing to do with the Palestinian, story, and they absolutely advocate. Some of the most vociferous supporters that I work with, are people of the Jewish faith. And it's and it's very inspirational. As far as I haven't lost. I'm generally an optimistic person. Yes, this past year has been very difficult, but I think just as much as I've seen the ugliness come out, I've also seen the beauty and the people, the courage in people to support what's right.
What a lot of people have seen or consider as ugly is how those protesting for the Palestinian people have been treated by the governments, the militaries, the authorities. Tell me about your daughter Serene, who herself was trying to, now reached an age, late teens, as a young woman, trying to express her voice at a protest. What happened? Tell me.
So my daughter Serene has been really an inspiration for a lot of people. Once she's in college, she's been trying to lead a lot of peaceful movements to bring light to the tragedies affecting her family, her own family. It's not just the Palestinian people. And she's done a lot of brilliant things at her university, and she one of the things she tried to do was to have a peaceful protest, and it was very she was a leader of this protest at her university. She organized it. She talked about very specific targeted goals, and she said that we were having this peaceful protest to specifically ask my university to, number one, to disclose what funds our university is using that supports in any way the killing of Palestinian civilians and the occupation of the Palestinian people. She asked for them to divest from those companies if that's the case, because it's unethical for the university to be supporting companies that support violence and the killing of innocent people. She asked for the university to specifically call for a ceasefire. Very specific issues. She had a multi-ethnic, multicultural protest. People from all over the university. They were not just Palestinian. They were, people of all faiths, all religions, and they had this protest, and it went on all day. And I actually have video footage of this entire thing. They were dancing together, bringing signs. Very, very peaceful protest. And unfortunately, the governor of Virginia. Released an edict and told the police that they needed to crack down as quickly as possible on these protests. And around 8 or 9 p.m., it's pretty, remarkable. It's something out of a movie. If you watch this video, police come up in these large vans with riot gear, tear gas. They lined up and essentially just, plowed through these protesters. And tear gassed them. My own daughter got punched in the face on video. She had to go to the emergency room. She was literally just standing her ground along with the other protesters, trying to just continue to raise awareness to the tragedy and the plight of the Palestinian people. And this was what resulted of it. Multiple protesters, not her, but multiple protesters that she worked with, ended up getting arrested, and were having to defend themselves over a peaceful protest. So it's been very difficult. It's affected us on multiple levels.
So, Dr. Haddad, your daughter Serene, who was punched out that peaceful protest by the police, is one of 5 children you have, ranging from early 20s to early teens. And I wonder how you manage their understanding of the situation, their expectations, how they can move forward, knowing what's been going on and considering the loss.
I always try to instill in them in a sense of, number one, I make it very clear to them that, this is about curing the injustice and equality for all people. I think it's very difficult for them when they see every day the injustice that's incurred by Palestinians, both in their family in Gaza and also here. I mean, every one of them has encountered this in one way, shape, or form. The bullying in school for being Palestinian, my daughter, of course, my youngest son, it happens to all of them. And I think what we try to instill in them is a sense that, just advocate for what you know is right, and everything else will take care of itself. Don't sink to other people's level. Build collaborations with people who truly mean well and who also believe in equality for all people and justice for all people. And everything will work out, but you have to be positive, and you have to try to advocate for the equality. You can't just sit by actively, passively, and just expect everything to get better.
As we reflect on the anniversary of October the 7th, 2023, since the attacks on Hamas, I should say I spoke also to an Israeli man, a relatively young man, whose brother attended the Nova Music Festival, which was attacked. And he was abducted after seeing his wife killed. The shelter in which they hid was sprayed with bullets and a grenade was thrown in. Their 3-year-old son is now being looked after their grandparents. And while he hates the people he holds responsible, it was interesting to hear him saying that he still hopes of living in peace with Palestinian people. And despite the unimaginable horrors that you and your family have held, what's your view on that? Do you see any kind of common bond between the innocent people on both sides who've been affected by this conflict?
I absolutely do. And the reason I do is because you see it every day. You see the collaboration between well-meaning people of the Jewish faith and Israelis and Palestinians and people who, and it happens every day. And you see this collaboration. I think there's a humanness in all of us that bonds us together. And I think, I can stand here and say that I can feel and empathize with the suffering of anybody. It doesn't matter. I don't represent just the Palestinian people. I think, the suffering of anybody, Israeli or Palestinian, is unnecessary. The problem here is that we don't recognize the big elephant in the room, which is, if you don't treat the injustice that's been happening for 75 years, the inequality, the apartheid, the unequal military laws and the unequal, ability to have access to water and food and all those things, you can't have that. Show me anywhere in the world in history where you've had this level of injustice and apartheid and there be peace, but I am, to answer your question, very optimistic because of the collaboration I already see. I can recount, to the story you mentioned about October 7th, somebody I know very well and I respect, Miko Peled, who's an Israeli, who's the son of an Israeli general. And, he had a person in his family, tragically, who was killed in a suicide bombing. And this was back, a couple of decades ago now. And his response to that, rather than turning to hatred, was to actually ask the right question, which was to say, what level of desperation have we caused the Palestinian people that somebody would be willing to lose their life, and kill somebody else because they've gotten to that level of desperation, and that led him to the Palestinian cause, and he's one of the most inspiring leaders now, trying to advocate for equality for Palestinians and Israelis.
Is it difficult, especially for your family in Gaza, not to hate the Israelis?
One of the things that just honestly moves me to tears every time I think about it is just how inspirational the people in Gaza are. Because there's a Palestinian term that we use called sumud, which means, resilience in the face of oppression. And, they show it every day. And what I mean by that is nothing gets them down. I mean, the circumstances they live under, anywhere else in the world, if you erase the term Palestinian, you ask people to live under the conditions they live under, I don't think very few people in this world could live the way that they live. 4 hours of electricity, barely enough water to do anything, days without regular food, inability to leave an area the size of a very, very small U.S. state, your whole childhood, and yet they live. They live, and they not just live. They refuse to be disappointed or let down. They try to live, and they try to have their kids live. There is so little hatred in the people that I know and all my family. I don't think the term, the other side really comes up. They of course focus on the injustice, but they try their best to live through it, and they're unflappable. It makes everything we go through in the United States just seem like nothing compared to what they go through. It's inspirational.
And now the situation is such that more than 70% of the buildings to date in Gaza have been destroyed, reduced to rubble. The supplies and conditions are even worse than ever. What does your family have to look forward to if and when the conflict stops?
So, I mean, among my family, all my extended family, there's not a single person whose home is still up and intact. My family home that I grew up in, that I mentioned to you earlier, is completely destroyed. We have albums dating back to the Ottoman Empire. I used to spend hours going through these albums with all my family, and they've all been burned, they've all been destroyed. The house is down in rubble. Every single family member is living somewhere else, whether it's in a tent, or somebody's home. There's not a single person who has any regular place to live. Having said that, again, the sumud that I mentioned, people, they love their land, they love their people, they love that where they live, and they love everything about it. And it's not the physical, it's the emotional. And I think they will rebuild, and I have no doubt in my mind they will rebuild, and they will be even stronger, because that's just the kind of people that we are.
There are those who believe that Israel's goal is to shift everyone out of Gaza, that they have ambitions on the territory. Would your family ever consider leaving?
I don't think so. I mean, most of my family would never, leave permanently. They adore and love their land way too much.
Even if and when this ceasefire does take place, there is no turning the clock back, considering what has happened. How do you move forward emotionally, psychologically now, and get to the next phase past all this? Is it possible even?
I think that the way to get past it is to the ceasefire is like sort of peanuts compared to the underlying issues. Nothing will get better until the blockade on Gaza is over, and people can actually get. You have to remember that the water and the electricity was all controlled by the Israeli authorities. So it's not like we have any access to it without it's shut off, shut on. And so, the conditions that lead to the injustice have to improve. Water has to be allowed in. Electricity has to be allowed in. People in all of Palestine, in all of the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank and Gaza, they have to be allowed to live as equal citizens, equal people. And until that happens, none of this will get better. You have, hundreds and hundreds of people in the West Bank getting killed. What does that have to do with Gaza? Why are they getting killed? Why are settlers killing Palestinian civilians in the West Bank? It's part of the overall, occupation, the apartheid, the injustice. And that to answer your question, that's what has to be fought by the international community. In this day and age, it is unacceptable in the international community, in this day and age, in 2024, for the world to support an apartheid system. And it's just not acceptable. And I think when the world wakes up to that, this will get better.
Dr. Tariq Haddad, thank you for taking the time to tell your story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Almog Levy celebrated his third birthday with his family this summer, although celebrated is actually not the best word to describe the occasion. As so often since October the 7th, he asked where his mum and dad were, and he asked when they would be coming home. But on that fateful day last October, his mother, Anyav, was killed, and his father, Or, taken hostage by Hamas gunmen as they hid in a shelter at the Supernova Music Festival. Almog's uncle Michael has committed his life to securing the release of his younger brother, Or, and he joins me now in Washington. Michael, thank you for making the time. Now, I'd like to talk about your nephew, Almog, or Moggy as he's known, in just a little while. But tell me first about his parents, your brother, Or. Paint a picture of them for me.
I guess you can call them the perfect couple. They used to be the perfect couple. They met about 15 years ago. At first, they were very good friends, part of the same group of friends. Einaf even had a different boyfriend when they met. And then they became friends, and they started hanging out together all the time. And after a while, we all knew that it's about to happen. My mother actually asked him, "Oh, why don't you date Einaf?" And he just told her, "No, I can't date Einaf. She's like my sister." And then a few months after, they started dating, and from that day on, they were never apart. They loved traveling, they loved music festival. Well, kind of like the new Israeli dream.
And that's the interesting thing. You've always described them as soulmates. You said that Niav was like Or's soulmates.
Exactly. I mean, she was his whole life. They did everything together. They went to music festivals together. They traveled the world together. They were never apart, like I said.
Having known each other that long and being so close, what was it like when little Moggy came along and suddenly they were parents?
At first we thought it will change things, but they actually did the same things just with him this time. They flew everywhere with him. They were, I think, like a few months before October 7th, they went to Thailand with him. They had a lot of fun together.
So before that fateful day, October the 7th, it literally was all flowing very, very nicely then.
Yeah, it was like a dream, I think.
Then, of course, everything changed the next day. They'd headed to that Supernova Music Festival. And as with many things in life, timing can prove to be, quite tragic. How did the events, from what you know of everything, how did the events unfold for Einaf and Or?
They actually got to the Supernova Festival at 6:20 a.m. It was 9 minutes before the attack started. And from what I know, they immediately ran from the area. They all actually texted my mother that they are heading back. But from what I know now, they wanted to turn left, which is the way to their home. But the road was closed, so they had to turn right and drive south. Then they had to run into a bomb shelter because of the missile attack. And from that day, that second on, everything went crazy. They got into this bomb shelter, squeezed in together with 27 others. I'm not sure if you saw those bomb shelters, but it's basically a bus stop made out of concrete with not even a door. It's a tiny one. From inside, I called my mother. It was 7:39 a.m. You're completely terrified. He just repeated the sentence, "Mom, you don't want to know what's going on here." And 10 minutes after, the terrorists arrived to that bomb shelter and sprayed it with bullets, with grenades. They even fired an RPG into it. And he had to watch Einaf being murdered in front of him, together with 17 others, before he was abducted.
It's hard to imagine how chaotic things were. How long did it take you to find out, you and your family, to find out exactly what had happened to them?
It took us a while. At first, I wasn't too worried because, unfortunately, in Israel, we are used to those missile attacks. So I kept telling myself, okay, they will be fine. It's just a missile attack. They will hide in a bomb shelter and then head back. And my mother actually called me it was around 8:30 or so. And she was crying. She told me that she was worried and she doesn't know what happened and that doesn't answer the phone. I was actually angry. I told her, Mom, you're just thinking bad things. We'll stop thinking about the worst because the lines probably fell or something like that, and he will call us very soon. And only at 10:15, I got a call from my uncle. He asked me if I know what happened to all or if we heard something from him. And I told them that they should be on their way back, but I'm not sure. That second on, I knew that something really bad happened.
It sounds like, you're so used to that, living in that way, that you tend to remain optimistic, which is interesting.
I think that's kind of how I try to see everything. I try to be as optimistic as possible because you have too many reasons to be pessimistic in Israel.
Now, seeing that video of the attack on that shelter and Or's capture must have been pretty difficult, obviously. But you want the world to see that video. Why is that? Why do you want it to be so public?
It took us a while to decide we want to release it and to show it to the world. But the way I see it is that sometimes the world need a reminder. People need a reminder that there are actually live hostages in Gaza. And I know it's really easy to forget about them, but it's about them. It's not about politics or the war or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's about human beings.
It's very difficult to imagine what this last year would have been like for you. I mean, it's gone on way longer than most people could have imagined. And I'm wondering, emotionally, how trapped you feel in that moment because things haven't moved on after so long.
So I keep saying that people ask me, what are you going to do on October 7th? Or how do you intend to mention it? For me, it's just another day because I still live in October 7th, 2023. Things were stuck there for me. Everything feels like one long day.
Have you become a community with other family members of the hostages? I mean, how does that help you cope? Obviously, if you do get together, it's a support structure. How have you found that coming together?
That's actually one of the positive things that happened because of it. They became my family. I can talk to them. They understand me with no words sometimes. And it's helping.
And yet, the difficulty is that all of you, the families of those waiting, you've had to deal with news. Either you hope for news of release or you have the tragic news, as was the case with the bodies that were found.
Yeah, it's terrible. Sometimes when they are getting released, it's the happiest day you can imagine. And sometimes when we hear horrible news like the 6 that were executed, that's the most horrific news you can think of. So in a way, it's like an emotional roller coaster. But the amazing thing is that we stay together. Even the families that got the worst announcement stayed with us, and they keep fighting with us. And that's amazing to see.
Conflicts, they have tragedy on both sides quite often. And as you try to cope, and you and the families of the hostages try to cope with the situation on your side, how easy or difficult is it for you to see what's happening on the other side? That, the suffering obviously some of the Palestinians are going through, many Palestinians are going through.
I hate to see anyone suffer, and I keep saying it everywhere, that Hamas didn't just do it to us as Israelis. They did it to his own people. The Palestinians are suffering because of Hamas. And the fact that Hamas is still there means that everyone will keep suffering. And like I said, I hate to see anyone suffer. And I would love to live in peace together with Palestinians, if possible. And the only way to do it is to release the hostages, and this will end the war. And that's what I think that the world should do. Push towards this.
One of the issues, Michael, is that often a conflict like this just gets seen through the political lens. And I wonder, when you see it being pushed into that political lens, how you worry about the other aspects. I mean, for you, how much is it political?
For me, it's not related to politics in any way. Obviously, I'm not naive. I know the solution has to be through politics somehow, but people has to remember that those are human beings. All is a real human being. The rest of the hostages are real human beings with families and hopes and dreams and plans for the future, just like you and I. And although it's very easy to take it into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's not about it. It's about human lives. It's about people who just wanted to go and celebrate in a music festival, and people who were kidnapped from their beds. This is not war. They didn't want to fight anyone. We all want to live in peace. Most of the hostages are actually peace activists. I want to live in peace with the Palestinians. I don't hate anyone. I just need my brother back and the rest of the hostages back, and hopefully we can find a way to live together and in peace.
And you've advocated tirelessly for the release of the hostages, including your brother, and you reached out to some fairly prominent people. What's been the response? Who have you reached out to, and how have they responded?
Sometimes I don't even remember, because I've met so many influential people, but just to name a few, I've met the Pope, I've met presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers of any country you can imagine. The response is usually very sympathetic. They show solidarity. Sometimes they even do things behind the scenes or publicly. Honestly, I don't care, as long as they are doing something to help and to end the suffering for both sides. I'm fine with it. If they can help me get my brother and the rest of the hostages back, I'm fine with any kind of response from them.
Do you worry to some degree that perhaps all these people you are meeting, that the politicians are so wrapped up with their own stuff that you're being paid a lot of lip service, that more could be done?
The fact that they are still there means that we all can do more. Me personally, the politicians, the media, all of us. So yeah, sometimes I meet people and I know that nothing is going to come up out of it, but I just keep doing it, because you never know who will be the one who will make the change or be able to help.
We're talking here in Washington, D.C., the heart of U.S. politics. And I wondered whether you feel that the U.S. policy on the Israel-Gaza conflict is helping or hindering the situation when it comes to releasing the hostages.
Honestly, I don't know what's the right way. Not I don't know what other families should do. I don't know what politicians should do. I try to wake up every morning and tell myself, ask myself what I should do now. For me, the fact that the hostages are on the agenda means that the world haven't forgotten. And like I said earlier, the only way to solve the issues in the Middle East starts with releasing the hostages. Everything else will happen only when they are released. So this is what I want, and this is what we are calling for.
It feels kind of frozen to you then, the way things are.
I guess. I mean, we don't hear anything about negotiations right now, so it is, but we'll change it.
Now, I understand you've been disappointed by the fact that some of the human rights organizations that are out there haven't been able to help you. Explain to me what happened with that.
In short, nothing. They didn't meet the hostages. They didn't pass medicine. They didn't even meet them. We expected a lot more. We expected them to at least see them and make sure that they are treated. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. I'm talking about all of them. The Red Cross, all the organizations of the UN, none of them did anything.
Is it possible that perhaps they don't have the ability or access because of the way the conflict has been going? I mean, is the military action, for example, in Gaza perhaps even hindering the chance for them to do that?
I don't believe so, because they have connections. They have people inside Gaza. And from the discussions we had, for example, with the Red Cross, they prefer to preserve the connections with Hamas and not to hurt them. And in a way, they give up on seeing what's going on with the hostages in order to keep those connections with Hamas.
Now, it's interesting because you're saying that connection that they want with Hamas, you're also saying, and you have said, that Hamas has to go. And in the aftermath of October the 7th, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually even said he was determined to wipe out Hamas. Now, I wonder, do you feel you fully understand that? I mean, do you fully understand and support that approach, or do you think it might actually be a hindrance to progressing the release of the hostages?
Oh, I think that the way or the order of things should be the opposite. If you ask any normal human being on the street, they understand that Hamas is a terror organization. They didn't just murder Israelis. They murdered Muslims. They murdered a Muslim guy outside of my brother's bomb shelter because he tried to save the others. He spoke to them in Arabic. He told them he was religious, and they just abused him and executed him, basically. So they have to go in order for the Palestinians to have a chance for a normal life. They have to go, but we can get the hostages first and then finish the job with Hamas and make them go for the sake of everyone in the Middle East.
That's what I was wondering, is whether it's a case of the Prime Minister of Israel, continuing with this military action at the cost of the hostages.
I don't see it the same way, because unfortunately, we have experience with hostages in Gaza for more than 10 years now, with no military action. They didn't come back. The Hamas didn't want to negotiate anything about them. So they have to feel some kind of a military pressure. But yes, I agree that after a certain point, Israel has to get to a deal. And that's what we're calling for.
I'm wondering, when you saw thousands of people coming out on the streets and demanding a ceasefire, whether you felt this might be a chance then of a change in the policy that would allow the hostages to be released.
Yeah, we felt supported. And those hundreds of thousands there on the streets demanded to get back all the hostages before it's too late. And that's what, like I said, that's what we're calling for.
How do you think Israel's new focus on Hezbollah now will affect the chance of getting all and the other hostages released?
I think that everything is connected. And Hezbollah is a completely different issue, and it should be solved. But once again, that's part of the bigger picture. If the hostages are back, everything can be solved. The conflict with Hezbollah, the conflict with Hamas, basically everything that's going on on the Middle East can start recovering only after they are back.
Is it a bit of a catch-22 though, Michael? Because what you have now is you have the Houthis, you have Hezbollah, and then of course Hamas continuing its actions. And those others, Hezbollah, Houthis, they're trying to support Hamas because of the military action taking place. So it's almost like without any kind of ceasefire, everything is stuck.
Yes, but I think that people tend to forget that behind everything is Iran. They are financing all of them. They are financing Hezbollah, they are financing the Houthis, they are financing Hamas, obviously. So everything is connected. But to your question, yeah, I agree. There has to be a ceasefire. But before we can get to a ceasefire, we need the hostages back. The order of the thing should be the other way around.
So if Prime Minister Netanyahu was sitting in this room with us, what would you ask him to do?
Very simple. Get to a deal. Seal a deal. Get the hostages back and then do whatever you need to do with Hamas or Hezbollah or everyone else.
Let's get back to your little nephew, Almog. How has he coped with the past 12 months? Because it's been almost a year since, he's had a hug from his parents or had any kind of contact. I mean, I know it's difficult, but do you do your best to keep the memories of Or and his mum alive? Or are you kind of trying to shelter him a little bit so he doesn't feel the depth of that loss?
Oh, it's very tricky because on one hand, we want him to remember. We want him to know who was his mum. We want him to remember all and know that all is there and he will be back and he is his father. So on one hand, we tell him stories, we show him pictures, we show him videos, but on the other hand, we don't want to deal with it too much because obviously he misses them. He wants to see them. He wants to meet them again. Unfortunately, it's not possible with his mom, and we're still fighting to get his father back.
And it's even more tricky because, as the time goes on, you're passing birthdays and anniversaries. Again, how do you treat those?
Those milestones I think those are the hardest. He celebrated his birthday alone. And we threw him a big party to make him happy, and he was happy. For us, it was one of the saddest days of our lives. But we try to keep him happy and try to treat him like a normal kid. But obviously those milestones that are important in every parent's life are without his parents.
Talking of anniversaries, you said something very poignant a little while ago. You said October the 7th is coming round again, first year anniversary, but for you it's just another day. I wonder though, do you think there's any chance that when people do have to remember that date as it comes around, that it might create more impetus, more movement for something to be done? Because people now will say it has been a year and there hasn't been a resolution.
Now, obviously, this date is symbolic, and yes, we can and need to use it in order to remind people that there's still no solution, that there are still 101 hostages in Gaza. So, for me personally, it doesn't mean anything. It's just another day, but it is a day that we can use the media attention to remind the world that there are still hostages back in Gaza.
Mike, sitting with you, I can sense, obviously, the depth of the emotion. It's your brother who's been taken hostage. You've lost your sister-in-law, who's his soulmate, and you're now dealing with, looking after his 3-year-old son. Is there any time that you find it so much, the pressure to be so much, that you fear that this will never resolve positively, that you might not see Or again? How do you avoid getting into that kind of depth?
Obviously, this is somewhere inside my head all the time, but I try not to think about it because for me there's no other way than him being back. I won't let this amazing boy to grow up without a father. And I promised my parents actually on the second day that I'll bring him back. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'll bring him back.
Now, we know that some of the hostages have been able to see news coverage from time to time, so trying to take a positive approach on this with the chance that, might have a chance to see this interview, might have a chance to see what's going on. What message could you send to him now?
It's very simple. I try to approach him from time to time. I want him to know that we are looking up for Almog. We'll keep him happy. And I want him to stay strong and know that we are doing everything to bring him back, and that we'll bring him back.
Is there anything you could say to his captors?
I don't waste my time on those monsters. Those are not even human to me.
Well, Michael, I wish you luck getting your brother back, and thank you for making the time to talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's program, the European Union condemns Israel's attacks on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses UNIFIL of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah. At least 22 people are killed, 80 others injured in airstrikes on a school-turned-shelter in central Gaza. This comes as 4 Palestinians are killed and dozens are injured after Israeli fighter jets bombed tents on the grounds of Gaza's Al-Aqsa hospital. And the Israeli military says 4 soldiers have been killed, more than 60 others have been injured after Hezbollah launched a drone attack on an Israeli army base in central northern Israel. Well, I'm joined now by Andrea Tenenti, who is a spokesperson for UNIFIL, that is the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. Andrea joins us from Beirut. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I know it's a very busy time for you. Just to help our viewers understand, UNIFIL is tasked with monitoring a ceasefire for a war that ended in 2006. That was the 33-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. Now that there's something closer to active engagement and warfare between Israel and Hezbollah, what is the role of UNIFIL?
Well, now the role of UNIFIL is even more important than ever, because it's important to bring back stability in the south of Lebanon. Our peacekeepers are still on the ground, despite requests by IDF, Israeli forces, to move from some of the position close to the blue line. But the decision was to stay. It's important for the UN flag to fly in south of Lebanon. It's important to be there because we have been asked by the Security Council and also by the international community. It's important to still have some monitoring capabilities, not only to report to New York, to the Security Council, to the international community, but also to assist the local populations. Of course, our mandate and our capabilities have been challenged. Resolution 1701 also has been challenged in recent months. But the main provisions of safety, security, stability, support to the Lebanese army are still valid. What's important now is the full implementation of 1701. But the implementation is not with the mission. We can support it, but it's up to the parties. So we need to go back to the cessation of hostilities and find a viable solutions or agreement to bring back stability to this region.
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is calling on UNIFIL to withdraw forces for your own safety, or for their own safety, I should say. That implies they're in grave danger if they stay, doesn't it?
Well, we were told, as I said, by the F days ago to move some of the positions. And yesterday, the Prime Minister addressed directly the Secretary General, who issued a very clear statement. We are staying in the South. That's our role. We are mandated by the Security Council. We cannot have member states to dictate the fate of a peacekeeping mission that is the will of the international community. So it's important to be here, to monitor, to have an international impartial presence in the South. And again, it's also important at the moment for main stakeholders and Security Council and to find solution to this conflict, to find a political and diplomatic solution.
And what is that solution? Because we're in an impasse here. Does it rest with the UN Security Council?
The solution, of course, is something that needs to be negotiated by the parties. But we have said all along, 1701, Resolution 1701, which is the resolution that stopped the conflict in 2006, the main provisions are still valid right now. Of course, as I said earlier, the resolution has been heavily challenged, but the main provisions are still there. What we need is commitment from the parties. What we need is the full implementation of Resolution 1701. Then, of course, will be up to the Security Council to decide how to move forward or if there are needs for amendment to the resolution, but the main provisions are still valid. Full deployment of the Lebanese army to the south of Lebanon, ensuring that the south of Lebanon from the Litani to the Blue Line doesn't have weapons, only the Lebanese army, bring back state authority, not have air violations or ground violation from the IDF, and also long-term solution. We have been working until last October, before the conflict started, for 18 years, invisibly marking the Blue Line. A lot of work was done. A blue line, a border that does not exist between these two countries. So there was work that was done between 2006 until last year. We had the longest period of stability in the region. We need to go back to that. I don't say that is easy. It's very challenging. The region is very challenging, but it's important to continue to go back to the cessation of hostilities and work on long-term solutions.
Just going back to the reported attacks, the attacks that happened on UNIFIL outposts throughout southern Lebanon, they've been described by UNIFIL and others as deliberate attacks. How can we be sure they're deliberate?
Well, when you have monitoring from our positions, Israeli tanks hitting a tower inside our position in Nahura, inside the headquarters, this is deliberate. When Israeli forces, they also hit our cameras with a drone. They go inside the bunker, close to a bunker where peacekeepers are sheltering. When illumination is hit, these are deliberate attacks against our peacekeepers. And we've been very vocal, not only UNIFIL, but the international community. This is a violation of Resolution 1701, but it's also a violation of international humanitarian law.
Yeah, I saw these reports about attacks on your cameras, and I didn't really find very much out about what the cameras were for. What are they for?
Well, the cameras, they give us the possibility of seeing immediately outside the perimeter of our base for security reasons, for the security and safety of our peacekeepers. Illumination the same. We need to have lights inside our compounds in order to not only to be able to see, but to keep that kind of visibility inside the base. When you enter with a drone close to one of our bunkers, this is concerning.
Okay. UNIFIL says it speaks to both sides. That I assume means you've got some dialogue with Hezbollah, some dialogue with Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding of that. Given that you're talking to both sides, I'd just like to ask where you see things heading to, given what you're hearing from both sides.
Well, our communication channel is with the Lebanese authorities, with the Lebanese army, and with the IDF. We don't have an open channel of communications with Hezbollah. Of course, when we speak to the Lebanese authorities and to the Lebanese army, the message are conveyed to Hezbollah. But the communication at the moment is not only related to deconflict and decrease the tension, but very much related in at this specific moment to ensure that peacekeepers are not a target.
And how do you respond to the accusation that Israel has leveled at UNIFIL for providing Hezbollah with, quote, human shields? How do you respond to that specifically?
Well, what I've said just now, about the human shields. We had Israeli defense forces a few meters away from our positions. We had Israeli forces entering inside our base on Sunday morning and stay inside our positions for 45 minutes. So I don't know where are the human shield or who's using UNIFIL, but when you are in a situation with IDF troops inside Lebanese territories and there is an exchange of fire between Hezbollah and IDF, we are in the middle. So the concerns is from both sides that we need the parties needs to ensure and there is one of their obligations to ensure security and safety of our troops. So the facts are pretty clear what's happening right now and the issue of human shields.
Yeah, of course, firing on peacekeepers would be a war crime, wouldn't it?
Well, this was something that the Secretary General said yesterday, and in one of on the statement. But at the moment, we have been lucky that peacekeepers have been just injured, and this is a serious violations, and that's something that has been a huge concern for the international community. As I said, member states and troop contributing countries have been even more vocal about these attacks.
Given, as you were saying earlier, there is dialogue between UNIFIL and the Lebanese and the Israelis. I wonder what response you had to your Israeli contacts when you hear things like what the Israeli Minister of Energy, Eli Cohen, has said in the last day or two. He called UNIFIL a useless force, and he called the UN a failed organization. What would you say to your Israeli contacts when you hear remarks like that made about your forces and your organization?
We are not here to comment on every statement issued by political entities, ministers. We are working with the parties. We are working with the IDF. We are doing our job. We have been able, as I said before, to try to bring some stability. In the past, there was a lot of work that needs to be done. If 1701 needs to be implemented, 1701 is the responsibility of the parties. It's not the responsibility of the mission for implementation. So we don't need to comment on everything that minister from either side or from all around the world are saying about the mission. We are just working with the parties and again report to the Security Council and trying to at the moment focus on try to bring back stability to the South of Lebanon. But again, I would say that it's a huge responsibility on member states also to do that, because the conflict that we're seeing in these days between Lebanon and Israel, or between Hezbollah and Israel, is a conflict that could potentially trigger a regional conflict. So this could have catastrophic consequences. So the moment is not to raise the tension, to increase the tension, but to find viable solutions. And it's important for Security Council or main stakeholders to take this as a main priority.
Yeah, just tell us what you mean by that, because I've heard you use that same phrase before. This risks turning into a regional conflict with catastrophic impact for everyone. Catastrophic and everyone. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by those two words.
It's not what I mean, what everyone has been saying. The conflict at the moment, we see what's happening in Gaza, we see what's happening with Iran, with all the regional powers. So anything can trigger something much bigger, because it's not only limited to a couple of countries. It has more impact in the whole region. And whatever has impact in the region could also have wider consequences. So it's very simple and very clear what's happening at the moment. This conflict has been going on not for a few weeks, it's 12 months. more than 12 months, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in different other areas in the region. So the consequences, of course, could be regional. And this is not something that comes out from our statements, but pretty much everyone in the international community and diplomacy is saying and warning about the consequences that a regional conflict could bring to this part of the world.
And when you speak to your Israeli contacts and you give them warnings like the one you just articulated there, does it come with some advice as well? Do you tell them how you think they should proceed, or do you suggest to them that one course of action might be better than another? And what sort of a response do you tend to get from them?
This conversation is confidential between the head of mission and the parties, so I don't have this kind of information, and this information is more related to the conflict, the situation, and they are not shared publicly, but communication is ongoing.
Okay, just wanted to ask you about the humanitarian situation on the ground in southern Lebanon. I know that a lot of the towns and villages are empty, but not entirely empty. Some people couldn't evacuate for whatever reason. Just tell us what the humanitarian situation is and how UNIFIL and other UN entities are managing to help people trapped by the violence to get access to essential supplies.
That's the problem. The problem is that we are not allowed to do that, because the conflict does not allow to move to all these areas. Very difficult. Because whenever we try to deconflict humanitarian activities, and we do it every day with our UN agencies and local NGOs and Red Cross, we are not allowed because of security reasons, because the situation is too dangerous to move around. And
who's telling you that? Who's saying you're not allowed to move around?
When we deconflict these activities with the IDF. So or there are no responses, or they say that the security situation would not be able to ensure the safety of this convoy. So we have been able to do some assistance, to bring some assistance to all these villages. There are thousands of people stuck in these areas without the most basic needs. And it's important to assist them and to support them. But at the moment, it's been very challenging. And I think it's very relevant for everyone to understand that humanitarian assistance has to be given, protection of civilians has to be granted to all the people that are still in the south of Lebanon, although thousands and thousands have left and went up to the north.
Okay, this is my last question to you. I mean, in 2006, it was a 33-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. Just looking forwards from here, it doesn't sound like there's any sign of any end to the violence anytime soon. What sort of a time frame could we potentially be looking at here, Andrea?
Well, if I had the answer, probably I would not be here. And we had 34 days of conflict in 2006, but it was a completely different conflict. The only thing that was similar, that was the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, but there was no other conflicts in the area. The conflict right now is way more lethal. At the time, there were no drones used. So a completely different kind of conflict, very unpredictable, very difficult to guess. And that's why it's dangerous. And that's why we are warning everyone that this could have really huge repercussions for the region. And it's important for the international community to step in and take it as a main priority to solve this conflict that has already been killing thousands of people and damaged and destroyed the region across the blue line for the last 12 months.
Andrea Tenenti, spokesperson for UNIFIL, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the European Union has condemned Israel's attacks on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon and dismissed claims that the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is hindering the Israeli army. That's according to Associated Press. Well, this comes as recent attacks have left 5 peacekeepers injured, with most of the blame placed on Israeli forces. Well, the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, stated that their work is vital and that attacking UN troops is completely unacceptable. Before a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg, Borrell emphasised that only the UN Security Council can decide whether to relocate UNIFIL peacekeepers, and urging that Secretary-General Guterres should not be blamed. Well, yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called for UNIFIL to follow Israel's warnings to evacuate, accusing them of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah. Well, in a video directed at Guterres, who is currently banned from entering Israel, Netanyahu urged the UN chief to remove UNIFIL from the danger zone.
I would like to appeal directly to the UN Secretary General. It is time for you to remove UNIFIL from Hezbollah strongholds and from the fighting areas. The IDF has repeatedly asked for this and has been met with repeated refusals, all aimed at providing a human shield to Hezbollah terrorists. Your refusal to evacuate the UNIFIL soldiers makes them hostages of Hezbollah. This endangers both them and the lives of our soldiers. We regret the injury to the UNIFIL soldiers, and we are doing everything in our power to prevent this injury. But the simple and obvious way to ensure this is simply to get them out of the danger zone.
Mr. Secretary General, get the UNIFIL forces out of harm's way. It should be done right now, immediately.
Well, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has also condemned Israel's call for the mission to leave. This after urging EU member states to pull the plug on a free trade agreement with Israel. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by the independent Irish senator and former captain in the Irish Army who took part in a peacekeeping mission to Lebanon in 1996. Dr. Tom Clonan, thank you very much for speaking to Al Arabiya News. Can I just start by asking for your reaction to the news of these attacks on UNIFIL positions in southern Lebanon during the last week or two?
It's a grave development, and it's a breach of international laws of armed conflict and UN Security Council Resolution 1701 of 2006, which prohibits either the Israeli Defense Forces or, for that matter, groups like Hezbollah from opening fire on United Nations peacekeepers in South Lebanon. So it's a grave development, and I think taken in context of Benjamin Netanyahu's advisory today, for the UN to evacuate, which was the word he used, from South Lebanon, it shows that the attacks on the United Nations were not the sort of spontaneous actions of Israeli commanders on the ground, but is part of an Israeli political and military strategy to get the United Nations, in other words, the international community, to get them out of Lebanon so that the Israelis can have full reign in that border area.
In a piece you wrote in the last week or so, you said Irish troops in Lebanon are now acting as observers in what is a de facto war zone. That means what they're doing is not what they're supposed to be doing, is it?
Well, we can still partially complete the mission in that, unlike the situation in Gaza, where you didn't have the international community, monitoring the activities of the Israelis on the one hand or Hamas on the other, and the Israelis were able to behave in the way that they have, resulting in the deaths of, at this stage, 42,000, mostly innocent men, women and children. So whilst we're not able to patrol at the moment in a meaningful way, the 10,000 troops of UNIFIL, it's a 50-nation coalition, can hold Israel to account for its actions on the ground. And if we were forced to leave, I do think that would be a very dark moment, for the Lebanese civilians that are left behind, that are trapped in the villages close to the Blue Line, and also those Lebanese civilians who remain in cities like Tyre and Sidon. If they were to see the UN flag taken down, the lights to go off, and all of these international peacekeepers and observers to leave, I think it would be a terrifying moment for them, because I think it would signal to them that the actions that Netanyahu has carried out in Gaza are about to be replicated in Lebanon.
But that's not like to happen, is it? Because that's not what UNIFIL's saying. They're saying they're not going to go anywhere.
At the moment, I think the United Nations may redeploy some of their troops. I think the ground action is intensifying. There's no doubt about that. The Israelis have committed 4 divisions of ground and mechanized troops to the incursion. And I think as it becomes clearer over the coming days what precisely are the axes of advance of the Israelis. So we know they're operating in the area of Naqoura, which is on the Mediterranean. It's the first Lebanese town just north of the Israeli town of Rosh Hanikra, where UN headquarters is. I think they're going to move up the coast road towards Tyre and ultimately Sidon on that line of advance. They're also recently active in the area of Ramia, which is in the center of UN Sector West, where the Ghanaian troops are, where they penetrated the perimeter of their post and injured peacekeepers with smoke rounds and other munitions in the last 24 hours. And over in the east, where the Irish are, which is near Maroun al-Raz and Yaroun and Bint Jabal. So we can see, it's a multi-pronged approach, a number of axes of advance. And when we have a clearer picture of where they're going, the UN might decide to redeploy troops where they can still observe but not be in the direct line of fire. Having said that, the Hezbollah attacks on Benjamin in Israel and at the military base south of Haifa, which has inflicted quite a lot of casualties, I think that's going to increase the pressure on Netanyahu to intensify his operations. And I think, inevitably that will lead to armed confrontation with United Nations troops, as has happened in the past.
And they'll be in a difficult situation, won't they, the Israelis, in territory like that of southern Lebanon. It's very different from Gaza. You know the terrain because you were there. What are your thoughts about what an Israeli, what armed confrontation between the two sides would look like in that part of southern Lebanon?
I think it's going to be very bitterly contested. And I think it's important to point out that Hezbollah also have breached the laws of armed conflict and are in breach of the Geneva Conventions by firing missiles at civilian targets in northern Israel, in Galilee and elsewhere. So all parties to this conflict have shown that they're prepared to commit war crimes. I'm sorry to use such a blunt term. So I expect, as you say, Hezbollah are not Hamas, and Lebanon is not the tightly packed, densely populated area that Gaza is. Hezbollah will have plenty of room for maneuver. They will have more battle space than was available to Hamas. And we've already seen in the exchanges of fire that the Hezbollah have been able to inflict casualties on the Israelis, notwithstanding the pager attacks of the end of September, the sort of dismantling of their command and control functions, the killing of Sheikh Nasrallah. So, I think it's going to be bitterly contested. In 2006, the Israelis suffered quite a few casualties, and I think they were a little bit surprised at Hezbollah's capacity to kind of meet force with force on the ground. Like the Irish, we've been in Lebanon on a continuous basis since 1978. And in that 50-year period, when there have been incursions, we've lost troops to both sides, and to both the Israelis and their Israeli-backed militias, and also from Islamic resistance groups like Hamas and others. So I think it's inevitable that, because we are literally human shields now between the warring parties, trying to protect the civilian population, trying to observe and report on what's happening, I think there's a grave danger that we will lose people in the coming weeks as this ground incursion intensifies.
Yeah, and that's an area where you and the Israeli Prime Minister appear to agree on, because he used the same language, saying that UNIFIL peacekeepers are indeed being used as human shields there. In terms of a response from the international community, well, since you're in Ireland, I'd just like to ask you what you'd like to hear from the Irish government. We have heard some words of condemnation for attacks on UNIFIL forces. Ireland has 370 or so troops on the ground there. Perhaps more than words, what would you like to see the Irish authorities, the Irish leadership saying?
Well, the Irish government has been very vocal in its condemnation of the retaliatory nature of Israel's operations in Gaza particularly. And we were one of the first European Union countries to move forward and formally recognise the state of Israel along with our Spanish partners. In relation to Lebanon, our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Micheál Martin, has been very clear. He said that you cannot destroy a nation just simply to dismantle a resistance group like Hamas or Hezbollah. That is, Israel has the right to defend itself, but it doesn't have the right to, breach international law in doing so. We've had a lot of experience of conflict on this island, myself included. With regard to Lebanon, we have experienced this before. For example, when I was there in '96 during the Israeli Operation Grapes of Wrath, where they targeted all of South Lebanon, the situation became so grave that we took over 200 terrified Lebanese civilians onto our UN position at Al Yaton. And within days, the Israelis had targeted our neighbouring UN position at Qana, killing 106 Lebanese men, women and children in one incident. And that prompted the Clinton administration in April 1996 to broker a ceasefire between Hezbollah and the Israeli forces. And I think, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think there will be some sort of a mass casualty incident or a catastrophe that may actually prompt the United States to get involved, because I think they're the only people at the moment who can persuade Benjamin Netanyahu to stop this, what I think is potentially a catastrophic and destabilizing intervention in Lebanon. I think it risks direct confrontation with Iran and, a regional war. In practical terms, the Irish government, there's very little they can do, although we could close our controlled airspace to flights emanating from the United States that are delivering weapons and ammunition to the Israeli Defence Forces. That's something that actually the Irish government has taken steps to prevent now.
Yeah, and the Irish and the Spanish are talking about pulling the plug on a free trade agreement with Israel as well. Do you think that will make a difference?
I think I think any and all pressure has to be brought to bear. And I say this, I absolutely believe in the right of Israel to exist and the right of Israel to defend itself. And I absolutely condemn the actions of Hamas and Hezbollah, who continue to breach international law by firing missiles and holding hostages and so on. These are criminal acts. But the principal victims in this conflict are the innocent men, women and children of Gaza, now Lebanon. And when you think of the numbers now killed in Lebanon, over 2,000 dead, many of whom are civilians, and over 6,000 very seriously injured people. I mean, I've seen the effects of high explosives at close quarters. The burning, the soft tissue injuries, the blast effects, shrapnel, which leads to limb separation and decapitation. So Lebanon is now experiencing the same casualty rate as has been inflicted on Gaza in just the last few weeks. And really, the world has to bring this to a halt. This has to stop. It is potentially, it could lead to a regional war with wider implications, to be honest.
Yeah, and just lastly, because we're almost out of time, I just wanted to ask you, we're coming up to sort of 30 years since you were involved in a peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. I mean, how it makes you feel to see that part of Lebanon, not to mention the rest of the region, drawn into a horrific conflict involving mass losses of life on all sides.
It's very depressing. And, when I was in Lebanon as a young officer, we witnessed killings on a large scale. And again, the principal victims were innocent men, women and children. And I never thought that I would see a repeat of that exercise and the failure that it brings, because this does nothing to assist Israel's security and its survival in the medium to long term. I think Israel, under the leadership of Netanyahu, they risk sowing the seeds of their own destruction, because we know from Ireland's history of oppression and terrorism and violence that violence begets violence. I mean, this will strengthen support for Hamas, for groups like Hezbollah. I feel so sorry for the people of Israel, for the people of Lebanon, the people of Gaza and the West Bank, because what's missing here is positive leadership. We have toxic leadership in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu, latterly Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the Iranian leadership, it's toxic masculinity. It's with a propensity for conflict that will only make things worse and not better. We need a diplomatic and political solution, and we need courageous leadership that is ethically oriented and that has moral authority. It's sadly lacking at the moment.
Okay, well, on that powerful note, we'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Tom Clonan. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
To Gaza now, where at least 4 Palestinians have been killed and dozens of others injured after Israeli fighter jets bombed a tent camp on the grounds of the Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah. Well, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital officials say that 25 people were transferred to the Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza just afterwards, suffering from severe burns. This all happens as doctors are working under difficult circumstances to treat women, children and the elderly who have been burnt in the strikes. Well, the Israeli military says that it's been targeting militants hiding amongst civilians. Well, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the central city of Deir al-Balah was already struggling to care for a large number of wounded individuals from an earlier strike on a school-turned-shelter in nearby Nuseirat, a strike that killed at least 22 people and injured 80 others when that strike hit in the early hours of the morning, and it engulfed many tents into flames. Well, let's get some more analysis now, and I can speak to Oxfam's policy lead in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel, Bushra Khalidi. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Since you're in Ramallah, I thought I'd just start by asking you about developments in the West Bank, because we're receiving reports of a deadly Israeli raid in Jenin today. If you could just bring us up to speed on what you're hearing and what the latest is in the West Bank, and then we'll move on to Gaza.
I mean, I think it's important to underscore that the military raids that are happening in, major population centers across the West Bank, and we've seen that in the last couple of weeks, but, these are daily occurrence for Palestinians living in the West Bank. Military raids happen in Ramallah, where I am, very regularly. Of course, the intensity and the use of, really deadly and lethal weapons and bombs and airstrikes have been a new kind of component of Israel's military raids in town centers like Jenin and Nablus and Tulkarem. But they continue to be part of Israel's policy of creating coercive environments for Palestinians living under military occupation. And this includes policies of collective punishment, which we see in Gaza as well, whereby they, either besiege an entire city, close down all of the entries and the exits, and prevent people from moving in order to carry out their military operations that end up with extensive collateral damage, whereby the last time there was the big military operation in Jenin, they literally leveled the roads and completely bulldozed them. So these are, policies are definitely intensifying, but we have about 700 military checkpoints. On Friday, I have a piece of land right outside of Ramallah that we go and farm on the weekends. It's about 20-minute drive from where I live. We weren't able to go because of the military checkpoints on all exits of Ramallah, preventing us from moving. It's the same for traders, for businessmen, for people going to school, to universities, or to even hospitals. We are prevented from our, basic right of freedom of movement. We can't move from one city to another city without having to encounter these Israeli military checkpoints that cause not just immense traffic, but also a lot of stress. And often, people can get stopped for hours at these checkpoints. Not just that, it's just been the extrajudicial killings of Palestinian unarmed civilians across the West Bank in record numbers. And now we have the olive harvest that's starting in the West Bank, actually last week officially. And we expect it to be a bloodbath. because of settlers taking the opportunity to attack Palestinian families, harvesting their olives. It's a tradition of ours, and it's always a very scary time for Palestinian communities and farmers.
Yeah, and actually, you're just speaking about your own personal experience. I was reading about a report that your family home in East Jerusalem came under attack. Some Israeli settlers tried to seize it. That was back in April, May, June, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to ask you what the latest was with regard to that, and are they okay?
I mean, it was in June, and yes, settlers forcibly entered our home under the full protection and cover of Israeli policemen who were there and did absolutely nothing. They beat up my brother at the time and prevented us from even entering our own home, believe it or not. But we were able to get an injunction of the court, and after 48 hours, the settlers were forced to leave. But the thing is that the threat remains there. The threat is always omnipresent, and we have to protect our homes. And, you know, I mean, at the time, I never really thought that this could happen to us because we have the paperwork, and we were lucky in that sense because these are old properties of the old city. Often people don't have the paperwork or don't have the resources to get lawyers, which fortunately we have the privilege of having. So often, you know, people are unable to get the cases going and battling them through the courts because they don't have enough resources. But also, again, the threat remains there. We have settlers that live right next to our house in the old city, and we know that they're always eyeing that property because of its location and because of its, you know, of this being a policy where they are able to do this with complete impunity under the eyes and protection of Israeli forces.
Yeah, I mean, really distressing personal account you just gave us there. Let's talk about what's happening in northern Gaza. No food has entered that part of the enclave, we gather, since the start of this month. We're already the 14th of the month, and I'm assuming that means people are, in many cases, on the brink of starvation. How are people surviving?
I mean, again, you know, it's just to underscore this policy of collective punishment. This is something that we endure and know very well at the hands of, you know, Israel's military occupation. And again, we're seeing the same policies being applied across Gaza, but at levels that are, you know, absolutely horrific and unfathomable, unimaginable for me, where they are denying humanitarian aid to almost 500,000 people that are in the northern part of Gaza, and at the same time forcing them to leave, and you know, having these forcible evacuation orders where they're asking people to leave their homes. But where to? There's nowhere safe in Gaza. If anything, these families have seen their friends and their relatives evacuate to the south and completely destitute, living in absolute, you know, horrible, horrific, inhumane conditions in the south. And so they were not, why would they follow suit when they have no guarantees of any type of safety, of any type of shelter, or access to the most basic of services? Right now, our partner, the Coastal Municipal Water Authority, informed me yesterday that the Israelis not only have denied aid to Beit Lahia, Jabalia and Beit Hanun since the 1st of October, but yesterday they denied the entry of fuel to these three areas of the northern Gaza Strip, meaning that there's 0% water production at the moment in those three areas and in the northern in that part of Gaza. So not only are humanitarian aid unable to get their convoys up there, not only are, you know, our operations completely halted, and we've been explicitly denied from accessing those communities who are now facing the most, you know, vulnerable and urgent and alarming needs, but they're also cutting off the water, cutting off water to almost you know, we don't even know how many people out of the 500,000 are in Jabalia and Beit Hanun, but I expect a couple 100,000. I mean, in what world do we cut off water and deny people just water? In what world are we living in where there's silence and nobody's saying anything. And we're only expressing concern at what is happening in northern Gaza. We are raising northern Gaza at the moment. We've seen entire neighborhoods leveled to the ground. We've seen the refugee camp bombed. We've seen people sheltering bombed. We saw the Al-Aqsa hospital images this morning. Absolutely. I mean, I don't even have, again, words to describe the horror of seeing people burn alive, being crisped, intense, displaced multiple times. They're probably in the hospitals because they have family members that are there that are either getting treatment or cannot move. And you bomb displaced people living in displaced tents. I mean, what world are we living in?
Yeah, I mean, there are these reports, aren't there, and I'm sure you're aware of them, Bushra, of this so-called generals plan that was put forward by these retired Israeli generals. And the suggestion was that Israel use pretty much the tactics you've been describing, starvation tactics, to clear certain areas of a Hamas presence. I don't think I've articulated entirely as the plan is laid out. But I mean, it sounds as though that plan's already in action, doesn't it?
Well, so there's nothing confirmed. And so I'm unable to confirm whether that plan is in action or being implemented. What we know of the plan is, the idea to basically, in order to seek, to basically forcibly displace the remaining population in the north to the south. And so, yes, it's not been officially confirmed, but currently what we are seeing from the current military incursions is an evacuation orders from last week signals a trend of forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the south, while denying them humanitarian aid. And this is a deliberate action. This potentially could amount to a deliberate act of starvation and using starvation as a weapon of war, which is, what our analysis confirmed in the beginning months of Israel's onslaught on Gaza last year. And yet the international community remains passive and standing idle. Whereby they have actual duties and obligations to prevent this atrocity and use all their tools at their disposal to stop this disaster that we're seeing unfold in the north of Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, people are saying things, and even within Israel, there are reports of Israeli NGOs putting out a collective statement saying there are alarming signs the Israeli military is beginning to quietly implement that plan we were just talking about, the general's plan. States have an obligation to prevent the crimes of starvation and forcible transfer. So there are voices even within Israel. And then we've heard just in the last, during the course of this afternoon, China saying the humanitarian disaster in Gaza must end. China summoned the Israeli envoy to China and told them that. Do you get the impression that the Israeli leadership would listen to anyone at this stage? Do you think they're listening to any of their allies or world powers like China?
We know that. At this point, we know that statements of condemnation and slapping Israel's fingers is not enough. We need action. That's not action. This is just statements. It's words. We need action. And we know what the actions are. The ICJ set out very clearly in its advisory opinion of July the measures that third states can take to ensure Israel abides by international law. And, this includes, for example, halting arms transfers to Israel and the transfer of lethal weapons to Israel. That would be a great start for third states to start. And there's plenty of other tools in their toolbox. And we, as humanitarians, don't need to be the ones spelling them out for them. They know them very well. They've used them in other contexts. And we are urging to prevent complicity, to prevent further atrocity crimes, to prevent impunity, and to actually respect international law, respect the international rules-based order, to actually use your tools tools in your toolbox so that you are not complicit in what is happening in Gaza, and so that you are also, as a third state, abiding by international law and abiding by your duties and your obligations, and not just legal obligations, your moral obligations to act and do something to stop this. And we have not seen this in any meaningful way from the international community yet.
Sure, and just tell us a little bit about what Oxfam is doing on the ground in Gaza. What's the scope of your activities, Musha?
So, originally, before kind of responding to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we worked a lot with farmers, kind of giving them seed money to grow their crops, to, start small businesses through kind of agricultural and farming communities in Gaza. We do a lot of work on GBV, gender-based violence, MHPSS support, and we have a big program in water and sanitation and hygiene, where we've repaired infrastructure or installed infrastructure, repaired pipelines, etc. Right now, during our humanitarian response, our response looks like, for example, delivering fruit and veg boxes in the beginning of the war, hygiene kits, adolescent kits as well, water trucking to affected communities. We've provided MHPSS support in UNRWA shelters, for example. So it ranges. We've installed latrines in, makeshift kind of camps. We've also installed mini small desalination units back before Rafah incursion had happened in Rafah at the time, where it would desalinate water for a few thousand people. We are, for example, one thing that is pending and that's been restricted from Israeli authorities from entering is water kind of chlorine tablets to test water. So like testing kits to test the adequacy of water. That's been, for example, prevented from entering. And one, I think, or two of our desalination plants have also been rejected. So yeah, that's what our work looks like in Gaza.
And just before we finish, I wanted maybe, perhaps if you could appeal to the Israeli government, if you had a message for the international community with regards to the situation in northern Gaza, what would that message be?
I mean, my message to the international community is very clear. It's, you have duties, you have obligations. The bar is even higher after the ICJ advisory opinion of July and the South Africa's court case in the new year on the Genocide Convention. They have a legal duty and a legal obligation to prevent this. And otherwise they risk being complicit in the atrocity crimes that we're seeing unfold in Gaza. And therefore they must act. They have to use their tools in their toolbox. They need to halt arms transfers to Israel and any other measures that will put pressure on Israel. We need the international community to not just rely on statements of condemnation. It's no longer enough. We need real measures. The ICJ deemed the occupation illegal and has asked for the dismantlement of settlements and the occupation within a specific time frame. And third states have clear obligations under this. And they should abide by that. Otherwise, they risk undermining our international rules-based system. They risk undermining the international, law and order systems that we have in place to prevent these things from happening. And they risk this escalating even more than it already has, and even more than we already predicted that it would, and it will also put at risk other civilians in other contexts.
Okay, well, we appreciate you sharing all of that with us, and we wish you and Oxfam and your colleagues all the very best in your activities in the region. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me.
Bushra Khalidi, thank
Bye.
you very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye.
To Israel now, where 4 soldiers are known to have been killed, more than 60 others injured after Hezbollah launched a drone attack on an Israeli military base in central northern Israel. Well, military officials say the drone struck an army base near Binyamina, which is about 50 kilometers from the Lebanese border. Well, Israeli officials say that the 4 soldiers who died were all under 19 years of age, and they were all undergoing military infantry training, while 8 others are reported to be severely injured. Well, that incident, which occurred late on Sunday, is one of the deadliest attacks on Israel since the war began last October. Well, Hezbollah has claimed responsibility, stating that it was in response to recent Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon. Well, Israel's military, meanwhile, says it will look into how the drone was able to enter Israeli airspace without triggering an alert. Meanwhile, earlier today, Israel's military said it has successfully intercepted several projectiles fired from Lebanon after explosives were heard over the same military base that a Hezbollah drone struck the night before. Well, in a statement, they said, quote, following the sirens that sounded a short while ago in this area of Sharon, Menashe, and in the Wadi Ara, a number of projectiles were identified crossing from Lebanon into Israel territory. Well, the IF successfully intercepted all of those projectiles. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from Jerusalem by Israel's Special Envoy for Trade and Innovation, Fleur Hassan Nahum. Thank you so much for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya, Fleur. Really appreciate you taking the time. I wanted to start by asking you about Sunday's deadly attack in Binyamina, carried out by Hezbollah. Just for the benefit of our viewers who might not know the geography of Israel, Binyamina is 30 kilometers south of Haifa. Just tell us a bit more about what happened there.
So unfortunately, it was a deadly attack, many injured, 5 soldiers, unfortunately, who lost their lives, a drone attack on a military base. And there were no sirens, no chance for anybody to go into a shelter. As a result, from what I hear today, the protocols for these types of attacks are being adjusted. It was a very bad day for Israel. And unfortunately for the entire north and for what's going on in the north. I want to remind everybody that on the 8th of October, completely unprovoked, Hezbollah attacked communities in the northern border of the Lebanese border with Israel. 10 kilometers from that border have been completely evacuated. Also a couple died last week, were killed by a rocket. And so we have a situation when we're at war in the north for an attack that starts against us on the 8th of October, and the war in the south when Hamas brutally massacred innocent civilians on the 7th of October. So at the moment, we're very directly fighting these 2 front wars. Of course, we're fighting many more fronts than that.
Indeed. And the fact that Hezbollah managed to strike, by all accounts, pretty deep inside Israeli territory. I was just looking at a map of Binyamina. I mean, that will have taken a lot of people by surprise. And it suggests, doesn't it, that perhaps Hezbollah's capability has been underestimated.
Well, we always knew that Hezbollah could attack as far as Tel Aviv. So it's not surprising that they got to Binyamina. Binyamina is still in the north. What's going on is they're incessantly attacking Haifa. Haifa is a mixed city of Jews and Arabs, and they are incessantly attacking Haifa, making it the new Kiryat Shmona, as we call it. Kiryat Shmona is on the northern border, but now they're attacking further inland, and we know they have the capabilities. And what Israel's been trying to do, of course, for the last few weeks, and quite successfully for the most part, is degrading those capabilities. But we always knew that Hezbollah are the most dangerous terrorists armed by the Islamic Republic Iran that we have.
Hezbollah saying this is nothing compared to what's in store for Israel if it continues hitting Lebanon. I mean, Hezbollah sounding extremely defiant despite numerous setbacks, what you'd have thought was a significant degradation of their leadership and their capability. But there's no sign whatsoever, is there, that they're backing down?
Well, there's one thing is rhetoric and one thing is reality. And we know that back channeling, they're begging for a ceasefire. So they can talk big, but ultimately they understand that they've been significantly degraded. They've got nowhere to go but down at the moment. Israel is doing a good job of cleaning out anywhere between 10 to 15 kilometers from the border. The job that UNIFIL should have done since 2005, since Resolution 1701, which they didn't do, Israel is having to put in its own soldiers and do, because unfortunately Hezbollah can't be trusted. And they've been shelling our northern border communities. We can't have a situation where we have 70,000 evacuated Israelis who can't go home because Hezbollah is attacking the northern border communities. So then Israel has to create the buffer zone that UNIFIL should have created, which was agreed upon by the UN with Resolution 1701. Israel's having to do the job that UNIFIL didn't do.
And with regards to those peacekeepers in Lebanon, the UNIFIL peacekeepers, 5 blue helmets have been injured in the last few days. Condemnation from right across the globe. Attacking peacekeepers is a serious violation of international law. And I mean, I'm assuming you're pretty shocked by that.
Well, nobody's attacking them deliberately. They're in the middle of a war zone.
They say it was
in
deliberate.
The way.
UNIFIL says it looked like extremely deliberate attacks. That's what they say.
The Prime Minister has warned the UNIFIL troops, who are absolutely not done their job. They're in the way. They've said leave, because all they're doing is hindering our own operations. So there was nothing deliberate. Nobody's attacking peacekeepers. What we're trying to do is get rid of the terrorists that have been arming themselves to the teeth under UNIFIL's nose with absolutely no intervention from the international community that put UNIFIL there to begin with. Like I said, we're doing the job that UNIFIL was incapable of doing. So the best thing they can do right now is get out of the way.
But with all due respect to your Prime Minister, isn't it only the UN Security Council that can decide if UN peacekeepers are located from one place to another?
Maybe it is, but if they are in harm's way because we're fighting a war we didn't start, then the smart thing for the Security Council would be is to remove them, especially when the Security Council hasn't bothered to check whether they've been actually doing their job for the last 20 years. And in fact, we know that they've been doing the opposite of their job. They were always a bit of a toothless force. Hezbollah are, a very aggressive terrorist entity, and under their noses, probably knew it. Hezbollah have been arming themselves, making tunnels, creating military bases under those tunnels, hiding rockets in people's homes. They've been doing that with UNIFIL there. So if they're not going to help, they should really get out of the way.
With regards to comments levelled at the UN and UNIFIL specifically by a number of Israeli officials, but I want to pick out the comments made by Eli Cohen, the Minister of Energy, who said that UNIFIL is a useless force, the UN is a failed organisation. Is it helpful to undermine the significance of an institution like the UN that's been helping to maintain international peace and security since 1945?
Well, they haven't helped us very much, to be honest, apart from giving Israel our birth certificate. In the last 20, 30 years, all we've seen is the UN backing anti-Semitic resolutions against Israel. When you look at the record of the UN Security Council and the General Assembly, and you see that in an average year, there's 20 resolutions against Israel and 1 against a country like the Islamic Republic of Iran, 1 against Syria with 500,000 civilians slaughtered, then what credibility does the UN actually have?
Speaking of Iran, your country was attacked almost exactly 2 weeks ago by a barrage of missiles from Iran. Very limited damage, but a significant attack nevertheless. 2 weeks on, no response from Israel. What's taking so long?
Well, I'm not a military expert and I'm not in that room, but I'm assuming that we're trying very hard not to retaliate in a way that could cause a huge regional conflict, because who wants that? We didn't want any conflict to begin with. And Israel has to measure its response very well. I think it shows that we're not acting out of any type of impulse. We're acting very decisively, and we're acting strategically rather than just impulsively attacking back at a country who essentially set out to destroy us that night for the second time this year.
And with regards to diplomacy, to try to prevent the conflict you described, which some people who've spoken to us have actually said has actually already begun, that regional conflict is already underway. In fact, we had a US ambassador last week who said it is underway, so no point speculating on it about to begin. The French and Iranian presidents have been talking. initiative being shown by Paris. I assume there's not a huge amount of dialogue between Israel and Iran. Do you think their discussions, which, according to reports, were aimed at de-escalating the situation, will or can bear any fruit?
I'm not sure. It depends really how much the Islamic Republic of Iran see a regional conflict as a threat to the regime. I actually think that they are concerned about a regional conflict. Their own people don't want them. So this could be the opportunity for the innocent people of Iran who've been subjugated for decades by this regime, who are killing women, raping women, putting them in jail for showing a strand of hair, killing gay people. So in terms of their own people, they don't have much support in their own country. So I think the Iranians are very, very concerned of a regional conflict that could essentially remove them from power. Whether the French president will be successful in getting some type of regional de-escalation or not, we'll have to see. But let me tell you, if there is going to be a regional de-escalation, it has to include the return of our hostages that are still living in dungeons in Gaza.
Yeah, just picking up on that point, and we have had people again on this channel who've speculated on, how Iran is a divided country. Its leadership is isolated from large sections of the population. But one thing that's really going to give everyone something to rally around and galvanize support for the Iranian leadership would be an attack, a severe attack from Israel. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I don't think that's true, actually. We get messages every single day from Iranian people. We've seen them protesting on the street saying Israel is the only country with the courage to save us from these monsters. So I actually think the Iranian people, for once, are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here.
Okay, so more needs to be done to reach out to them. One video message from Benjamin Netanyahu, probably not enough.
I totally agree. There's a lot of people reaching out to them on a daily basis. And I myself, just as a personal, get hundreds of messages every week by innocent Iranians who are telling us, we're with you, and we don't want our regime anymore. We hate our regime. They kill our people, our innocent people. There's zero freedoms. And Israel is the only country with the courage to stand up to them.
There's so much more we could talk about, but I'm being told we're out of time. So we're going to have to wrap it up there. But I'd like to say a very big thank you to you once again for being with us on Al Arabiya. Fleur Hassan Nahum, thank you.
Thank you.
To the United States now, where Donald Trump's campaign team have asked Homeland Security for more protection for the former president. This after a man was arrested at the Republican nominee's rally in California during the weekend. Officials say the man was found in possession of a shotgun, loaded handgun, ammunition, and fake passports. All of this comes just 3 weeks before Election Day and just weeks after previous attempts on Trump's life. Well, for more on that, I'm joined now by the former FBI agent Bobby Chacon, who joins us from the US. Great to have you with us, Bobby. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. It's been,
Tom? Thanks.
3 days since that alleged incident in California. An investigation is underway, but are we finding out anything new or any more details about just what happened or didn't happen there in California?
Yes, we are. I think the sheriff initially came out, and the local sheriff whose deputies performed the arrest came out and said that this was a threat to Trump. And however, very quickly followed up by that was the U.S. Secret Service and the FBI. The federal authorities had come in and said they quickly looked at this individual and said they didn't think that this was an attempt on Trump's life or this was any kind of assassination attempt. So the individual has simply been charged with a local gun charge and released. He was released on bail, and so he's out. If I think if the investigation had uncovered anything that that led them to believe this person might have been a threat to Trump, they would have done something to detain him further.
But there will be, it's understandable that there's a degree of nervousness. I mean, this is the third time that Donald Trump has been in the headlines for precisely this type of concern, a massive concern about his security. But it sounds to me like he wasn't actually in any significant danger, therefore, on Saturday.
You're correct. That's correct, Tom. You're absolutely correct. It doesn't seem like he was any kind of threat. I think this person wasn't hiding in the bushes like we had in Florida or taking a shot from a rooftop as we had in Pennsylvania. This is a significantly different event than those two. This simply had several guns in his car. He seems to be some kind of digital journalist. He seems to be actually a Trump supporter by looking at his social media. So this doesn't appear to be an active attempt to harm Trump. It seems like he just had illegal weapons in his car because he traveled from Nevada, a neighboring state to California, into California, which has strict gun laws. An alert deputy did their job. They noticed something suspicious about the car. It had a fictitious, I believe, license plate on it. And so he investigated further, and he found that the guy had two loaded weapons in the car that he shouldn't have had. So they arrested him on local charges. So I think everybody's erring on the side of caution now that several attempts have been made on former President Trump's life. And this is an example of erring on the side of caution, taking him out of there, charging him locally. But be sure, if there was any kind of suspicion or evidence that he was a further threat to President Trump, that the Secret Service or the FBI probably would have filed additional charges to detain him further.
But there are a lot of strange things about the man's profile. You mentioned the suspicious license plate, a car full of weapons. He had multiple passports. I mean, who on earth was this man?
Yeah, it seems like, I'm not sure the right-wing extremist would be the right word, but he seems to be a conspiracy theorist. His online, he's a part of an online group that who puts out like documentaries that are about the deep state, what they call the deep state here, which is a very groups that are very suspicious of the government and always alleging that the government is up to, nefarious purposes. And so they release these documentaries that, are basically conspiracy theories. And so I think he's part of a group like that. So, a little bit of a kind of a different character. And so I'm not sure about the passports and the driver's license and different names on why he would have those. But I think that probably the FBI and the Secret Service looked over those documents and said they were probably for different purposes other than harming the president.
Yeah, it was passports and license plates rather than driving licenses that were found to be suspicious, according to reports. I just want to ask you, given that this is now the third time that we at Al Arabiya News have had to talk about President Donald Trump, or former President Donald Trump's security, do you think there are some changes being made? Do you think there's already been a rethink? Do you think it's already affected how he can campaign? What do you think's changed since the first of these incidents, which was by far the most serious, that one in July?
Yes. There have been significant changes, I think. They upgraded, and President Biden had actually said that President Trump will now have the full protection that a sitting president would have. The sitting president and the sitting vice president have the highest level of protection. Then former presidents have lower levels depending on the threat level. But since the threat level against Trump now has heightened, so has his protection. And so now, and even as late as last week, the Trump campaign asked for and received some additional military protection from the U.S. military. And those are things like surveillance drones to be flown over these rally sites and things like that. So there's extra protections that have been added to Trump. And apparently he's being protected at the level of a sitting president, which is a lot. And that also brings in U.S. military assets to his protection apparatus. So there have been significant upgrades to his security. Now, whether or not that impacts his campaigning, we're in a very tight race, and President Trump likes to do these outdoor rallies and have a lot of people there. And so he seems to be on schedule. He did one, I think, in Reno, Nevada, the day before the California one. And then after the California one, he went to Arizona and did another one. So it doesn't seem to have impacted his schedule much. But certainly his security has increased.
Yeah, we understand the Trump campaign is asking for military aircraft with anti-missile capabilities. That's according to a report filed by CNN. I'm wondering what the chances are, in your opinion, that his campaign team would be granted such a security detail.
Yes, I think, Tom, I think that request grew out of the Homeland Security had briefed the Trump campaign on the threat from Iran, which they considered a legitimate intelligence threat. They considered the information legitimate, that Iran did put basically a price on Trump's head. And so I think that in response to that, Trump's campaign wanted, because that would be obviously a more sophisticated level of attack capability that the government of Iran would bring. So they asked for that kind of stuff. And I think that they have added some military surveillance equipment, drones and things like that, that would pick up on something like that. President Biden, I don't know if he was serious, but half jokingly said, as long as they don't, we'll give them everything they want as long as he doesn't request F-15s. So I think that might have been a little tongue in cheek, but I think that that's the level of security that they're bringing to Trump now. I think they're bringing additional military assets because of that threat from Iran, which is obviously would bring in a more sophisticated level of attack.
I just want to ask about your own experience as an FBI agent and securing a major event with a very large number of people at it. How can you ever be sure that a gathering of thousands of people is going to be entirely risk-free for the people standing on the stage in front of everybody?
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't. It's never 100%. I've protected 2 Olympics, the one in 2002 in Salt Lake and the one in 2004 in Athens, Greece. And I was involved in the security of both of those events, very big, large, global events, people coming from all over the world, heads of state coming to some of the venues that we had responsibility for. The best you can do is, minimize those attacks, trying to do pre-event investigations, pre-event threat assessments, and try to lower the threat level. But you can never be 100% secure, but you try to limit them, mitigate them, and then minimize any kind of threat. And then you have a plan in place if a threat actually happens. How do you get your protectee off the stage to a safe location and things like that? So you never can be sure to be 100%, but you do everything you can to minimize that something might happen. And then if something does happen, you have a plan in place to protect the person you're protecting and get them out of the harm's way as quickly as possible.
I mean, the fact that we're finding out about these foiled attacks, none of them has been successful. This latest incident on Saturday was someone in the vicinity of an event who happened to have weapons. I mean, the fact these people are being found suggests, before they can act, suggests that the security surrounding Donald Trump is actually doing a remarkably good job, doesn't it?
I totally agree with you. And I think that those are the lessons learned. And each time we go through one of these events, we call lessons learned. And I think in Pennsylvania, you saw those faults. You saw those mistakes that were made. And I think, the sheriff's deputies there and the Secret Service there were called into question. And I think they learned from that. And I think the deputies here erred on the side of caution. And anybody that even looks suspicious is going to be talked to, is going to be confronted, is going to be questioned and possibly searched. And so I think you're right. I think that this is a sign that we've learned the lessons of Pennsylvania, and more now the deputies are, eyes are more alert. They're attempting to address more people that may look even possibly suspicious, because erring on the side of caution now, of course, is the way to go, because if these threats are legitimate. We've seen 2 legitimate threats so far, possibly a third. So I think that the security apparatus is doing its job. And I think this incident on Saturday proves that. I think you're absolutely right that this is a proof that it's working and people are being approached. And even if this turns out not to have been a threat to Trump, they did the right thing in searching him, finding those weapons and removing him from that venue.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like the sort of person you don't want in the possession of a large cache of weapons. For people who are watching who are perhaps a little bit cynical, who thinks perhaps all of this plays somehow to Donald Trump's advantage, perhaps giving him a little boost in the polls when he needs it, people feeling sympathy for him. It is, after all, publicity, and we are talking about Donald Trump. What do you say to those cynics out there who think that perhaps this isn't doing Donald Trump's hopes any harm whatsoever?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, when a person comes within a quarter of an inch of a bullet going through their brain, it's hard to say that they would be in favor of that. And additionally, President Trump has never been the type of person who lacks for public attention. The media seems to eat him up, whatever he says and whatever he does. And he doesn't need someone to shoot at his head to get that kind of publicity. He seems to be someone who is a publicity magnet, even when these attempts weren't taking place. he got his fair share or more than his fair share of coverage by the media, at least in the United States.
As my last question to you, I mean, as an American and as someone who clearly keeps a close eye on security and political developments in the country, have you seen anything like this, you know, in the run-up to an election, this degree of concern about the safety of one of the candidates in that race?
No, you know, I was born during the President Kennedy administration, who was obviously assassinated. And then in 1968, we had Bobby Kennedy. His brother was murdered, assassinated while he was running for president. But I was 5 years old at the time. And since then, you know, President Ford, I remember being shot at twice while he was president, President Reagan while he was president, but never in the lead up to an election, other than in 1968 when Bobby Kennedy and Governor Wallace later was shot. We haven't seen any of this in 50 years or more. This type of threat to one of our candidates. And we've had contentious elections before, but we've never seen this type of movement to do harm to one of the candidates. Not in my memory. I mean, I remember President Reagan getting shot. I remember President Ford getting shot, but those are two sitting presidents, not in an election, in the lead up to an election. I can't recall, of course, like I said, in 1968, we had some of that, but like I said, that's almost half a century ago. So no, these are very, very uncommon times.
Yeah, really unprecedented, isn't it? Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, though.
Sure.
Former FBI agent Bobby Chagan, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Guatemala. Adventure awaits at Guatemala. You can dare to explore the jungles or go on a canopy tour. The rainforests at Guatemala are perfect for thrill seekers to engage in many action-packed adventures. Guatemala is in fact known for its great outdoors. Its subtropical rainforests are protected, so people can enjoy nature-friendly activities such as hiking, biking, and horse riding. You can also hike up the Mayan pyramids. Tikal is a famous archaeological site hidden deep within the rainforest, where 70-meter or 230 feet high pyramids are seen through the canopies. It is a known UNESCO World Heritage Site that has more than 3,000 structures. And if a pyramid isn't enough for you, then you can also try hiking up an active volcano. Guatemala's Volcan Pacaya remains one of the most hiked volcanoes in the country. Molten lava slowly pours through its summit, creating huge dusk and lava fields that admittedly create an impressive landscape. Also popular in Guatemala is the breathtaking Caribbean coast. You can reach it by boating along the Rio Dulce. It is a highly recommended trip as you'll get to experience a unique, isolated island feel. There, you'll arrive to hammocks and a rustic-themed beachside. Of course, you should go meet the locals. Explore the unique highlands region of western Guatemala which is also known in Spanish as El Altiplano. Many of the modern-day indigenous Mayan groups reside there, and it's fantastic to listen to them speak in their native tongue. The locals retain the sacred rituals of their ancestors too, and you'll definitely enjoy the view of the great mountains and untouched beauty of the region's surroundings. Take a trip to the city proper. Although most tourists would rather skip the traffic-induced capital, you should still pay a visit. The place still has enticing gems yet to be discovered.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,